right, well, welcome everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners to order. It's September 24, just after 6:30 p.m. and we are going to get started with prayer and the pledge. So if Pastor Davies could get us started, that would be great.
Let's pray. Father, we come before you tonight. We ask for your blessing. We have no good apart from you. So we ask that you would come and give these servants your wisdom and help them to lead. May their leadership sustain our freedom and help us to live peaceful and quiet lives under freedom to obey your good and sovereign hand. Father, would you help us to recognize that you do according to your will among the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth? You work all things according to the counsel of your own will. Would you give us eyes to see? There's no authority except from you. And where there is authority, like here in this room, it's been instituted by you. You raise up leaders and you remove them. You resist the proud. You give grace to the humble. So give us a greater awareness of these realities. Give us strength to serve others in light of them. We thank you for the greatest of the good gifts that you've given, your Son, Jesus Christ, who came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. So, Father, we ask for your good and kind hand over all the proceedings and over these, your servants. We commit all of this into your hands. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. All right, thank you. You'll please stand for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Ms. Cosby.
Here.
Mr. Kleinjans.
Here.
Mr. Zylstra.
Here.
Mr. Bonema. Here. Mr. Moss.
Here.
Mrs. Wenzel.
Here.
Mrs. Curran. Mrs. Rhodey.
Here.
Mr. Belknap.
Present.
Mr. Bergman. Here. And Mrs. Miedema.
Here.
Have a quorum.
All right, excellent. Seeing as there's no correspondence, we're going to move right to item number 5, public comment. It's an opportunity for members of the public to come and address the board. If you would like, do we have a list?
We currently have 6 people registered on that list.
All right, and if I could just offer a reminder to state your name and jurisdiction when you come forward, you'll have 3 minutes.
And the first is Diane Fixie from Zealand.
My name is Diane Fixie and I'm from Zealand. I'm a candidate for Ottawa County Treasurer. But today I'm here to talk about last week's Finance Committee meeting. I have a copy of the budget documents that were handed out. They look the same, but one is for 24 and one is for 25. I do have copies for the audience if anybody wants one. Fiscal Services Director Karen Karazinski was visibly upset by the words used by Treasurer Clark. I'm a financial analyst. I decided to dig into the numbers and find out why Karazinski was so upset. My first employer ran his business by the saying, numbers don't lie, people do. Let's take a look. My comments are in red over Clark's report and are the same for both fiscal year 24 and 25. The first thing I noticed were the GL numbers down the left side. GL stands for General Ledger or List of Accounts and numbers or descriptions. These are familiar to me since I helped rewrite the chart of accounts at the county, and they tie to the state of Michigan Uniform Chart of Accounts. In the center of the page, we see the delinquent taxes paid since 2009. At the bottom, we have Treasurer Clark's signature and the date. I believe Treasurer Clark's $13 million reserve is extremely excessive. The center column reveals that Clark simply took the number from 15 years ago and said, whoop, this is my reserve. Actual costs averaged 6.4 million over the last 5 years and 6.2 over the last 10. The reserve is at the very least $3 million overstated. which means there is a surplus to cover the debt payment. Treasurer Clark signed this document on September 12, and this is significant. It is the Thursday before the final Finance Committee, before fiscal year end, forcing fiscal services to scramble to adjust the 2025 budget and find funds to pay the debt. Please be aware that budget documents are due in early May. This document is 4 months late for the 2025 budget and over a year late for the 2024 budget. More importantly, it changes the 2024 budget. 18 days before the end of the fiscal year, Treasurer Clark is telling Director Karazinski that the budgeted transfer to pay down debt will not be taking place. This is problematic. Imagine your partner, in business or personally, sharing that they cannot transfer planned funds and you need to figure out a $900,000 solution in 5 days. Finally, we learned that Treasurer Clark has been avoiding meeting with Director Karazinski. Director Karazinski said she has been trying to meet for months with no success. This is troubling because it follows a pattern of behavior that I personally experienced when I was on staff with Fiscal Services with then Deputy Treasurer Clark. Rather than attending the problem at hand, Clark will avoid it at all costs. The date of the document shows the truth of the. I'm going to keep digging into the numbers. I would do that if I had the job.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to dig in preparation.
Thank you.
Number 2 is Joseph McCarter, Georgetown Township.
I'm Joseph Parnell McCarter from Georgetown Township and lead the Save the Campbell effort. People can read about our effort at savethecampbell.com. A new UN pact bans all fossil fuels, not just coal, on an accelerated phase-out schedule. Quoting NPR article, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a global pact on Sunday that included explicit calls to phase out fossil fuels, which has been a stubborn sticking point in climate change talks for decades. The UN said the agreement was years in the making. The pact called for countries to triple its renewable energy capacity globally and doubling the global average annual rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030. In advance of this pact signing, The Guardian has reported that the UN hoped to galvanize summit talks by persuading world leaders to commit to stop burning coal, oil, and gas despite industry lobbying, and now they have succeeded. The pact also greatly increases the power of UN Secretary General Guterres to enforce this and many other world powers. This UN mandate comes at a time our regional grid operator, MISO, projects a growing electric capacity deficit beginning the 2025-26 planning year, when the county's Campbell plant is scheduled for closure and demolition. We cannot afford to let Consumers Energy close and demolish the Campbell in 2025. It provides electric to 1 million in our region reliably, affordably, and safely, and it generates it right here in Ottawa County, something none of the alternatives can substitute for anytime soon. This plant and infrastructure feeding it is worth billions of dollars, and we should not let it be demolished in 2025 is now planned. Grid operator MISO recommends a delay of such closures. Consistent with this MISO recommendation, Jamestown Township Board has approved a letter requesting Consumers Energy delay the closure. The Georgetown Township Utilities Committee of the board unanimously approved drafting a letter, and it's all the way to board approval. We are receiving positive indications from other town boards in the county. Representative Meerman's on board with it. Candidate Estrada just said he agrees with it. Will this county board join these town boards approving such a request letter? There is no good reason the closure and demolition of the Campbell plant should happen any sooner than the closure of East Michigan's Monroe plant in 2032. Hopefully, Consumers Energy will agree to delay the closure of the Campbell at the united request of Ottawa County. But if it does not, there are a range of options that Ottawa County has. These options include possible legal action, the county effectively stepping into the role of regulator of Consumers Energy, municipalization of the Campbell plant and placing an electric cooperative, and others. An option would need to be chosen which would receive broad support in the county. Becoming a charter county opens more options. But before we bring about the next step, our focus now should be getting every town and county board in the county
Thank you.
requesting delay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 3 is Heather Majestic, Georgetown Township.
Good evening. My name's Heather Majestic. I'm a Democrat running for County Commissioner seat in District 7. We often hear they're all corrupt when folks are talking about politicians. We know this is not true, but when commissioners hire political cronies to support a political agenda, constituents have a point. Why would the remaining impact commissioners engage in an exclusive process for hiring an administrator that is rushed and once again does not follow norms? Instead of hiring a short-term administrator in this abbreviated process, why not appoint an interim from within the administration? That's what happens all the time in business until a permanent replacement is recruited and onboarded. It happened 3 times this year in my department alone where I work at Corewell Health with senior leadership roles. I've heard from Commissioner Zylstra that last time the board hired a longstanding administrator, a public RFP process was followed to find a search firm, and the internal search committee included 3 commissioners and 3 constituents. That process seems much more fair and beneficial for the county. And in fact, involving constituents is a very good practice. I ask my current team at work to interview any new candidate teammates all the time when I'm hiring people. It makes a person hired more acceptable to all and the hiring team more engaged and accountable. A further concern is how the current board is politicizing county offices and services. Dwayne Eversole, Assistant Administrator of the newly formed Department of Veterans Affairs, sent an invitation to vets, inviting them to an event sponsored by Lighthouse Baptist Church, featuring Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council, an enterprise funded by the Koch brothers. Mr. Perkins is nationally known as a far-right political operative. The first page of the Family Research Council's website says, "Defend faith, family, freedom. Donate today." The wording is not lost on us. It went out to veterans on county email, an obvious misuse of taxpayer funds. As a disabled Navy veteran, having served in Alaska on the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and with SEAL Team 2, I put on the uniform for the purpose of defending and supporting the freedom of all Americans, not those who ascribe to one religion or political persuasion. It is at best unfortunate that Mr. Eversole did not consider the political implications of this action, and at worst, a violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. I hope the VA department does better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 4 is Rebecca Patrick, Allendale Township.
Good evening, Commissioners. Rebecca Patrick, Allendale. I'd like to offer comments on agenda items 8D and E, the litigation resolution and the transition committee. I am concerned about how the board is going to handle these matters, settling litigation and hiring a new administrator, in which there is intense public interest. Specifically, I'm concerned about the fact that these proposed resolutions are establishing special committees to handle these matters, yet excluding from participation any commissioner who is not a member of Ottawa Impact. When you serve as a government leader, the process you use to reach a decision is almost as important as the decision itself. Why? Because people want to see how the sausage is made, so they know what's in it and whether or not they should eat it. They want to know that you considered representative views and representative perspectives. It's how they evaluate whether or not they can trust you. And how will they know whether or not they can trust you? In this case, they will know if you give seats at the table on these 2 committees to Commissioners Bergman, Bonema, Curran, Kleinyans, and Zylstra, and not hoard representation solely for the Ottawa Impact Board majority. And why should you willingly share power like that? First, because almost half of this board is not part of Ottawa Impact. Commissioners Bergman, Bonema, Curran, Kleinyans, and Zylstra represent about 137,000 people here in Ottawa County. Those 137,000 people ought not to be sidelined, and they deserve to have their voices heard on these 2 important special committees. Second, because it will make these processes much more acceptable and legitimate in the eyes of all Ottawa County residents. Ottawa County residents expect their elected officials to understand the importance of keeping partisan politics to a minimum and to work together. And third, if you care at all about earning the trust of the residents you serve, it's a huge opportunity to demonstrate that, and absolutely the right thing to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Number 5 is Orlando Estrada, City of Holland.
Orlando Estrada, City of Holland. I just came to annoy you guys to make sure that when you guys actually are purchasing the body cameras, or at least make sure the sheriff's department knows that they're actually installed correctly. We actually keep them on. We actually keep the data for a long time to make sure it needs to be referenced at a future date. Should that be a thing? I also want to invite everybody to my meet and greet, because I'm the candidate for the City of Holland for District 3 at Margaritas Restaurant. It's next Thursday on October 3rd from 4 to 6 p.m. And trackers and disruptors are also welcome, because I am equal opportunity and everybody love everybody. I want to continue to say nice things about my opponent, who is not my enemy. I appreciate the fact that you voted no on the $50,000 robot called Core way back in the day. That was, I don't even know what that robot is right now. And I do not believe this is malicious, but I do know that my commissioner did put a post out about the review and job approval. And I just believe that there was something missing there. After letter H, there was this thing that says, be it further resolved, the Executive Transition Committee will receive an input from county commissioners, staff, and residents. And I just think that was a really important thing, but I believe that's probably just an accident. I also want to clarify something to anybody that's watching around the world. I'm not endorsed by any political action committee. No political action committee has donated to my campaign. I am not OI, I'm OE. I'm not out to get Ottawa Impact, and I know they're not out to get me, because Republicans typically support Republicans. Furthermore, is whoever's running Organized Ottawa, they clearly didn't talk to me. They're doing this misinformation thing about me. So let's just say hypothetically, their secret agenda is to bring back DI, for example purposes. So then why would they go after me if I look the part? That's just an assumption and presumption. I don't know if that's true, but I did check the campaign finance and notice that there is a common denominator in last names. So if anybody's watching, recommend you go to miottawa.org and check the campaign finance of whoever's running, because that way you know who maybe is trying to buy people out. Furthermore is, I agree with my commissioner that I think that the board should reflect the community. And I think we all can look at me and see that I might be something of that caliber. I also know that right now is that as I talk to people at the door, they want to do something about human trafficking. And I'm making efforts to bring people to Michigan out of state to learn about the signals to look for about human trafficking behavior. So with that being said, in my hometown, Holland, I think my commissioner would agree, is that hate has no home in Holland. Holland has a lot of diverse needs. And I just want everybody to know, if they want to learn more about me, go to votefororlando.com. And I will always speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves and defend the innocent. Thank you.
Thank you.
And social media posts don't vote.
Number 6 is Karen Obitz, Spring Lake Township.
Good evening, Karen Obitz, Spring Lake. My comment pertains to agenda item 8E regarding the Executive Transition Committee resolution. Process matters. Personnel is policy. At Ottawa Impact's clear intent since January 2023 has been to implement their preferred policies via political appointments. In his remarks at the end of the September 10 board meeting, Chair Moss assured his fellow board members and county residents like myself concerned about yet another transition in the county's top administrator role, that the transition process undertaken to fill that role would leverage best practices and rely on proven processes recommended by recruiting agencies. However, despite the language of this resolution holding out some hope that maybe this time we may finally see this board conduct itself in this search process in a manner that does better align with proven processes and best practices, it's difficult to imagine that the particular members of this special committee will approach this search process in a manner that contrasts sharply with what we've seen from them over the past 21 months. I say that because during that time period, we've witnessed a series of hires and appointments conducted in a manner that preempted best practices and in at least one case ignored the advice of the HR director, which reminds me that, so far as I know, I believe there's been a vacancy in that role for some time. One wonders what process if any, has been undertaken to date to fill it and why it has not yet been filled? Seems it would be beneficial to have the benefit of the professional expertise of a county HR director at this pivotal moment. But back to those appointments and hires we've witnessed since January 2023. Not only have several of them proven exceedingly costly, not only in terms of dollars and cents, but also in terms of the resulting instability, inefficiency, and negative impact on staff morale, but they have absolutely preempted best practices. So I urge the members of this proposed search committee to be transparent about the decisions they make in this transition process and to conduct themselves in accordance with a genuine desire to serve the staff and the county well. I also urge the board to schedule their public interviews of the candidate finalists in an evening meeting, and I urge the public to attend those interviews. For the common good of the entire county community you were elected to serve, this board must learn from its mistakes and make better choices when it comes to making pivotal personnel decisions, such as the county administrator. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 7 is Sheila Detloff, Holland Township.
Sheila Detloff, Holland Township. In John Anderson's statement to the media after he resigned, he said that when he came on as interim administrator, he took a leave of absence from a job conducting background investigations for police and fire departments. He said that company contacted him recently and asked him to either return or resign so they could fill the position. And yet now, he is suddenly free to remain in service to Ottawa County through the end of the year. I took a look at John's LinkedIn profile to find this investigator position he took a leave of absence from. It's not bullet hole firearms, and it's not his position as a probation officer with the county. The only one that fits was his position as a consultant/investigator with Reliable 6 Solutions. According to their Facebook page, they provide investigation services and crime prevention programs to include background and employee investigations. If you look up the annual statements filed by Reliable 6 Solutions on Lara, they are signed by someone named John Anderson, who lists his title as owner. And their Facebook page features a photo of John Anderson as the profile pic, and his name is in the contact info. So John apparently asked himself to return to his own company or resign, and he negotiated really well with himself, since now he's suddenly able to stay on here. He even got himself 80 hours of vacation time between now and December 31st. That's a yearly vacation rate of 14 weeks per year. I'm sure all county employees are going to be really thrilled to find out that that's the new standard for vacations. Obviously, all of this was pure BS, and it just speaks to the extraordinary nose thumbing that Joe Moss does at transparent and logical processes. Fortunately for us, he's as incompetent as he is arrogant. He screwed up and waited too long, and now he can't hire a new administrator for more than a one-year contract. What skilled, experienced administrator wants to advance their career with a one-year contract? The answer to that is none. So let's let John Anderson go back to his own company as he requested. And we don't need to hire what essentially would be another interim administrator for a year. Instead, start the process now of finding a new permanent administrator, but make it a real, transparent, well thought out, fair process involving all of the commissioners as suggested in the board's own rules. And make the board approval and hiring date January or later, when we can give them a full 3-year contract. To not do that would be foolish and absurd and an enormous show of incompetence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 8 is Kristen Dornbos, Allendale Township.
To start. My name is Kristen Dornbos. I have lived in this county for the last 25 out of the last 29 years of my life. I love this county and the people about it that live here. 6 years ago, I voted Democrat for the first time, and 4 years ago, I voted Republican. So I'm kind of in the middle, and you do you, boo-boo, so don't hate me. Something I do care about, though,
is our elections. And I have been on a journey the last 4 years trying to figure out them and learn them. And I won't go into the details because there's a lot to say, but I'm here for a final plea with the Board of Commissioners and the public to urge our clerks, our local clerks, and our county clerk to potentially turn on our scanners. In Ottawa County, we have Hart InterCivic machines, which have the capability to take a full ballot image scan of the ballot at the time of the election. And we have not utilized that function the last 4 years. We've asked the clerks to turn them on, and their responses, they take too long. They could take a minute, up to a minute. For Gretchen Whitmer's election, I worked in the absentee counting boards, and we sat for over 5 hours doing absolutely nothing. I think we could have scanned the ballots during that time. In the in-person ballots, there was barely any line, so I think there's time to scan the ballots during that time. We have all the days of in-person voting and absentee going forward. I think that's more than enough time to scan the ballots. The reason I think that having a ballot image is important because it keeps a record forever for anybody to look at the ballots, a Democrat, Republican, Independent. Anyone would be able to look at the ballots and do their own audit of the ballots if they would like. Our clerks do an audit, but they just look at the ballots, say there's 400 for Gretchen, 400 for Tudor, that's all. But if anybody wants to do a deeper analysis of the ballots, I think it's important to have for anybody. Instead of after 2 years shredding them or burning them and getting rid of the evidence of the ballots, I think that it's important to keep them forever. We have that capability in Ottawa County. Our clerks just don't want to utilize it. I think it's important, and I would love bipartisan support with everybody to try and encourage that to be turned on, or if you have to get somebody from Hart InterCivic to come and do a demonstration of how long it takes, I would definitely love to see that myself. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 9 is Bruce Greenlee, Park Township.
Good evening. My name is Bruce Greenlee. I live in Park Township. I didn't know Kristen was going to speak about on elections, but she does a great job because she's studied it and participated in a lot of research on how to make things better. As some of our other folks have stated earlier, it would be great if we would do standard business practices with elections. And as Kristen mentioned, our Hart machines, since we're using those for scanning or for tabulating in-person voting, absentee voting, mail-in voting, early voting, it would be great if we, in this county, finally use that scan feature and save it. There's pressure from the current Secretary of State on our county clerk, as well as all the other township clerks and county clerks in the state to not keep good records. So that can be, there would be no paper trail or computer trail. So I would encourage our clerk and our township clerks in this county to utilize what Hart has devised, as well as every other voting machine. They all have those features, and when they're not used, we don't have record. And so nobody can do anything except, like Kristen mentioned, just count what's there. And if those can't be verified, then pretty much we have nothing except an audit that tells us not much. So I would encourage the county commissioners and the citizens of this county to encourage our county clerk, all the township clerks to utilize the features this machine has devised. It's, and keep record of the way people have voted. And I thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Those are all the registered public comments we have, Mr. Chair.
All right, is there anyone else in person who would like to give a public comment? Welcome, just a reminder to start with your name and where you vote.
I'm Cindy Lorkey. I live in Grand Haven Township, District 9. So Roger Belknap is my commissioner. And I was thrilled to find out that Roger Belknap and Gretchen Cosby were going to run as write-in candidates in the November election as no affiliation candidates. So, and why I'm so thrilled is I went to an organized Ottawa District 9 meeting just to see what Phil Kyers and Eric DeBoer had to say. And first of all, one of the co-sponsors of the group was a professed liberal Democrat. And they were also encouraging the Democrats to cross over and vote on the Republican primary. And, to be sure you don't, spoil your ballot by, having a Republican and a Democrat candidate voted for on that ballot. So I had the opportunity to ask Phil Kyers about his stance on approving grants, with all the strings attached to them. And his comment was, well, would you want that money to go to Wayne County? My thought is you're selling your soul for the people of Ottawa County by encouraging or inviting in bigger government, more control over our lives, over our freedoms, our liberties. And so I didn't agree with his philosophy on accepting all grants. And I appreciate the way you research the grants and reject them if, they have something in there that's not good for the people here. So I want to thank you for that. So I am just really glad that we have a conservative candidate that we can vote for in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Hello, Adria Hill, Holland Township. So one of the ways that we can predict the future is by looking at the past. In fact, this rain was probably predicted by a few forecasters by looking at what they've learned from the past. So let's hop back a few years to the end of 2022, as some of the board members here were deliberating or trying to determine who they wanted their next administrator to be. As a public, we don't really know what that process looked like because it all happened outside of our purview. But if we look at today's packet, we might have a little insight on what happened. So let's see how that decision worked out for the county. After John Gibbs was on the job for about 6 months, there were signs of trouble. Then he made a hiring decision that led to a $225,000 lawsuit settlement against the county. And after about a year of him being in the position, the people who hired him fired him. So why should the 5 commissioners that are assigned currently in the agenda to this committee be trusted to hire the next administrator? Is the same type of hiring decision we can expect from Moss, Rohde, Miedema, Belknap, and Cosby to make again? Will they find somebody whose primary qualification is political allegiance over talent? And speaking of questionable proposals in today's agenda, why is the interim administrator who tried to quit being allowed to work the position part-time when it should be a full-time position? And why is he be given 80 hours of vacation time for 3 months of work? I've done some math. Between October 4th and the end of the year, there are approximately 59 working days. At 0.6 FTE and subtracting the vacation time, Mr. Anderson will only be working 25 days.
That's less than half of the working days left. So who will be doing the rest of the administrator's work the other 34 days? So I ask that you take consideration for the proposed resolution, have robust discussion, and consider adding a more diverse group of individuals onto the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else welcome? I was hoping Matt was coming up here.
Bob Spayman, London Township. Help me understand the resolution on the interim county administrator. You're reducing that role to 60% when it has always been a full-time role and that person needs to be here full-time, not part-time. Is Mr. Anderson supposed to work two separate places now? He's not coming to these meetings at all. The county and the other employer will suffer big time. Is Wetmore picking up the other 40%? That makes me shake even more. Ottawa Impact has seemed to run out of people to put forth in their unqualified candidate for the position. And Mr. Anderson has made the right, smart decision to leave the county before he is let go in January. Wetmore and Epperson have not seen the handwriting on the wall yet, with a new administration coming into place. I'm sure there is somebody out there who can be the interim county administrator. There are a lot of qualified people in the county. They just don't have the title of standing up to your flag. In other words, they're not OI people. I've got 20 years of experience. I wasn't asked. Anyway. And then you want to form a committee of 5 Ottawa Impact members. 2 of them voted out of office to do a search for a new county administrator that would be perceived as an Ottawa Impact and out of a job in 3 months. Is that the right thing to do to that person? Who would apply? Will that person be anybody but an OI candidate? I think not, given the makeup of the committee. The ledger seems to be definitely skewed to an OI candidate. A lot of questions here. The resolution itself is a complete joke and should be voted down because it is ridiculous. But it will pass because Joe wants it that way and the sheep will follow because they don't have a mind of their own. And as I said in the beginning, help me understand the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board?
My name's Dave Barnowski and I vote in Port Sheldon Township. I'd like to address the people trying to ask you to turn on the scanner function of the election machines. They think, turn on the scanner function. What else could there be? It's there, why not? They have no concept of the administrative headaches they'd be adding, the number of people that would have to be they'd have to hire somebody, I imagine, to administer it. It's a ridiculous thing. They're trying to weaponize their own ignorance of elections to try to make some issue so that they can blow it up later, I think. It's a ridiculous thing. They're not going to gain anything from it. They're trying to make an issue. They don't articulate what benefit it brings. I mean, something they can research later. People do, if they had that there, people do mark up their ballots. They would put personal information on the ballots. If they did any research on it, I did some cursory research, and that's one of the issues I found that would be a problem. So things would have to be reviewed and redacted before those things could be made public. There are issues if people would look into it. It would be expensive. It's not just turn on a machine. So that's one thing. The other thing is, the other people are making an argument with you to try to, on the hiring of the commission that you're trying to put together. Isn't it the same group of people who essentially helped you figure out how to hire Joe Gibbs? And to hire that thought it was a good idea to try to get rid of Adeline Hambley? So I appreciate you being consistent. At the very beginning of your your tenure, and here at the end of this 2-year period, you're using the same group of people to make bad hiring decisions. So at least there's that. Makes it very easy to know that I'm doing the right thing, opposing everything you do. Because the other people have come up here to try to get you to do the right thing, but we all know that you're just here to trying to get what's yours. That's what you tell people.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Christy Moplick from Zeeland Township. These past 2 years, it's been interesting what topics the public will come in running to the board to complain about. We've heard a lot in the past about how the commission had the best practices in finding an administrator for the county. Let's look at those best practices. They created a 7-member committee. They only put on 3 commissioners, so that would allow them to avoid inviting the public and keeping everything behind closed doors. The 2022 board had a new love for DEI, so they of course had to find a female-owned consulting company, which made them pay Michigan taxpayer money into a company in Illinois, GovHR, rather than find a local company that was coming off the COVID struggle. The 2022 board will say they invited members of the public to be on the committee. There are approximately 300,000 residents in Ottawa County, and somehow the public always were the same people. Jennifer Owens, who always seems to be part of the public, helped the 2022 board spend $23,000 to find John Shea. He wasn't hiding. He had already been sitting in this room since 2018. Speaking of Jennifer Owens, she also ended up on the ARPA committee in 2022. Again, the committee had only a few commissioners to keep it out of the public eye, and she earned a cool $100,000 as a bucket manager and still hasn't come back to report how the funds are working for the county. I would love to hear a report of all of the ARPA funds, including over $33.5 million towards just over a couple dozen projects, as Commissioner Zylstra bragged to the Holland City Council about spending in just one day. Not to mention over $5 million paid out to county employees who were still getting their regular pay, while many county residents and small businesses were struggling to make ends meet. So we can drop the act that best practices is what happened in 2022. Somehow creating committees with just under a quorum to avoid the public and spending millions of taxpayer dollars behind closed doors doesn't seem like best practice or transparency. Imagine those upset now about the lack of transparency. They would have hated the board prior to 2023, but no one was paying attention back then. The new Executive Transition Committee has all the same bullet points the 2021 GovHR had without needing to hire a firm from out of state. So let's not split hairs about the process, but let's note that this proposed committee allows the whole process to be public and transparent, give weekly updates to the whole board, and coordinate it with the independent recruitment firm. Let's face it, the commissioners opposing this idea simply don't want anyone hired until next year when the new board takes their seat. Yet, in a letter to the oncoming OI-affiliated commissioners from the prior legal counsel, Doug Van Essen stated, "Are you mad because Addie was hired and you didn't get to pick that position, or because most of the ARPA money had been spent?" Those that were following the old board's edict, they mandated that they pick the new public health officer, and they would have spent all ARPA money if John did not slow some of that down on that front. And both were their rights as commissioners until December 31, 2022, just as this board has today.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment? Right. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Cochran. I live in District 6 of Georgetown Township. Georgetown Township is the largest voting block in the county. We actually have 2 districts. And I have shoes that have put over 600,000 steps from April to August 6th. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is get the feeling that everybody wants to stay in their tribe. I had the opportunity the last 4 months to get to know people that I would have never crossed paths with before. Conservatives, moderates, liberals. And I think what I find with this commission is you're not willing to leave your tribe, that you think that you know best. But I can tell you from Georgetown Township that 57% of the people who voted in the primary said no to OI. And I think that you should consider it and talk to those people who don't necessarily agree. We have to come to a consensus, and I'm getting tired of this our way or the highway. Or if anybody that doesn't agree with you is a liberal. That's not true. I think what you need to do is listen to what I had the opportunity to talk to people, which I think is something that you guys haven't. And I think you need to listen to the people, because this board is not as well loved as you may conceive it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Next up is approval of agenda. I get a motion to approve the agenda, please.
Support.
And then motion and support. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving today's agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carried. Okay, we're up to consent resolutions. We have one on the agenda for today. Could I please get a motion to approve the minutes of the September 10, 2024 Board of Commissioners meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion carried. All right, up next, we have agenda and action requests. The first up is the FY 2025 budget resolution. The suggested motion is to approve the fiscal year 2025 General Appropriations Act. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and support. Any discussion? Any discussion at all? Commissioner Miedema?
I just wondered if there were any updates from questions that were asked at our last special finance meeting.
Yes, I could probably address some of it. There were a few questions related to the delinquent tax revolving fund and making sure that was either in 25 or 26. And the treasurer has provided information kind of directing those funds. That there was a request made to direct some of the funds for 25 into 24. And so that came through today. And so what that means is that it does not impact the 2025 budget resolution. Happy to keep going on that one, or I can move on if there's any other questions on that. That's essentially $600,000 that's used to help make debt payments and things like that. Yep. Okay, the only other one is related to there was discussion on the $900,000 COVID grant that the health department was getting. The information I have on that is it is currently in the budget. There's no positions tied to it, but it is available in case the health department would like to, plan on spending $900,000 on COVID or, I don't know, communicable diseases, things like that. Commissioner Miedema.
Did we have a line item for that particular grant last year? And if we did, how much was requested last year?
I don't have that exact information. There was a similar one last year that was rejected by the board. I think it was over $1 million though.
So did they come back with any rationale? Is that how much they used this year? Are they projecting a need for it? Is there a reason why it's at the moment?
To my knowledge, it can be used for anything related to COVID, communicable diseases, conferences, trips, travel expenses, trainings, kind of anything within that bucket, as long as it's their COVID supplemental grant funds. So it's essentially, as far as I know, it's the same thing as the board rejected last time, a year ago. And,
So from your understanding, there was $0 for this particular line item.
right.
So what changed that?
I mean, to my knowledge, the state wants to incentivize spending money on, COVID grants.
Would we have the money? So if it wasn't a line item that we budgeted for and there came a need for it, would that money still be there?
There would be money available for an emergency, sure, but if it's not allocated, in the budget, then that particular COVID grant would not be available, no.
So do you know, what did they do last year then, if they didn't have this line item? And if they didn't come before us to ask for more?
Well, I think there were some increases in budget adjustments when it was necessary. But I don't think they're planning on spending $900,000 on COVID emergency.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Zalestra.
So in my notes, I have the infection prevention grant. Is that the same thing that you're talking about?
Yes, COVID supplemental, the 900,000.
Okay.
Yes, that was renamed. The state took all of the COVID terminology out and renamed it to try to make it more palatable to people. At least that's my take on it.
Okay, but it is still an infection prevention grant.
The first sentence in the grant summary is COVID supplemental funds.
Okay, I'm just
Yes.
reading from what I have here.
I believe that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Commissioner Miedema.
Was there any other, I guess, dialogue with Karen? Is it related to this particular line item? Because when was this one brought before us? At the last special meeting last week?
It was mentioned at the meeting, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it wasn't highlighted or anything. It just came up during the conversation, and I think during HHS maybe. Yeah. Yeah,
Was
I-
there a reason why it wasn't put in their part of their budget process?
it was, it just went through the budget process like normal and, is essentially extra funds available. I think the state will continue to dole out COVID funds to incentivize spending in the areas they want to incentivize. Yep. Commissioner Cosby?
Curious, and you may not know this because I don't know this as well, but so you're saying the funds can be used for education, conferences, and travel expenses. Is that for communicable diseases, or is that just in general monies that are available to the health department for those purposes?
No, has to be, there's grant requirements. I don't know them all, but it has to be generally somehow tied to communicable disease or COVID or something. And you could probably argue that almost anything could be tied to that. Yeah. Yep. Commissioner Bonema, yeah.
Yeah. Just want to understand a little bit of the process to how we got here. My understanding is in years gone by, the administrator would sit down and have meetings with each of the department heads to discuss their budget, potential needs, give them some challenges to work on. Did that process take place with Administrator Anderson?
Yeah, he worked with all the department heads and worked on budgets for the whole county and worked with fiscal.
Because I'm hearing that did not happen, that he did not sit down with the department heads.
It's my understanding that it was a collaborative process and they all worked on their budgets and then presented it to the board. One thing I looked at was related to the general fund contribution that the county is contributing to the health department, since I thought that would be important to look at. Looks like that is actually an increase in this current budget. Commissioner Rhodey?
Just of note, I also went back and I looked at the COVID grants that we had looked at last year. And I think it was over $2.3 million of different COVID grants combined together that were rejected by the county last year.
And it was specific, I believe, to COVID.
Yes,
Yeah.
there's multiple different
Now
grants.
it's communicable diseases, so different.
Yeah, I guess from where I'm at, I understand the state would like to continue incentivizing spending in this area. I don't think that we need to pre-plan to spend $900,000 on communicable diseases and COVID. The funds are not tied to any positions. And so personally, I think that we should approve the budget resolution without the $900,000 in the grant and be consistent with last year. That'd be my position. Commissioner Rhodey.
So I guess a question would be, so last year when we were looking at denying those grants for COVID, one of the questions that came up was, what would we do if we had an emergency? And, you know, a true emergency that was happening, and we really needed some funding to get behind the measures that were needed, what would we do? And, you know, there are funds within the county where we can make something happen, and it's not that those needs would not be met.
Contingency budget.
Right.
I'm not expecting another COVID emergency. I was told that was once in 100 years. Yeah. Commissioner Klein.
So not having been here last year for this very interesting discussion. So we agree that there's contingency money in our general fund for this, and that this is a contingency, this grant is a contingency fund. So that would only be used in the event. I mean, what I do know is that whooping cough nationally is on the rise, and that infectious diseases will not stop. I understand the passions that COVID brings up in people, but there are a myriad of other things that will put you down. If this is for training and prevention of that myriad of other things, removal of that at this point seems to be a bit perfunctory to me.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Bottoма.
Yeah, I would just continue on with that. I mean, this is a big decision to make at the last second. If we need to make a budget adjustment in the future, we certainly can do that. But to step in and pull a $900,000 grant out without doing any kind of additional impact study or discussing, I don't have a chance to ask other people who might be affected by this what effect it might have. So I would ask that we pass the motion as presented, as written. If later on we determine together that it makes sense to pull it out, we can make that budget adjustment. But I don't think it makes sense to do that at this very moment.
Yeah, I agree with Jacob. I mean, there was talk about if there is a need to, access this grant and it wasn't there, that would go in a contingency fund, which is basically general fund. I don't see the sense in saying, we're not going to take this grant, but instead we're going to go to general fund money if we need to. And that doesn't make much sense at all to me.
I guess I'd follow up and ask, why would we need to access a COVID grant? What is this? What is the purpose? Sounds to me like by approving a $900,000 grant that's not really needed, we're planning.
Well, you said the word really, I mean, we don't know.
We
I mean,
don't
that's the whole point.
We don't know that it won't be needed, or?
Well, I guess the grant is in case we need it. If we don't need it, we don't need it. But why would we not accept something in case we do need it? And then, as Commissioner Cosby said, be forced to go to the contingency fund to pick up that cost, which makes no sense to me.
The cost for what? For an emergency?
Or any work that the health department was going to do on it, say the critter barn response, right?
So that-
Would we go tap into the general fund for that when
No.
we could have had access to state funds?
It's a great question. If we had something going on with the critter barn or some other business, the current budget covers that. They are fully funded through their normal budget. So this would be used, sure, maybe in an emergency situation. I'd rather not plan for another COVID emergency.
I don't think it's planning for an emergency. It's having money in case there is an emergency.
Right.
Oh,
This-
is
this-
there going to be one? Commissioner
Well, we
Townsend?
don't know. That's why they're called emergencies.
Right. So I remember back in 2021, 2022 with the COVID emergency. And I remember what the board did back then. And I remember what the health department did then. I remember the day there were 1,000 parents in this room, the
We are
board gave an
talking
extra
about-
$2.4 million
We're talking about the future.
to the
and
health department to
communicable
continue
diseases.
their reign of tyranny over the county.
Do you
so
realize what you're,
Personally,
do you realize
I would
that
rather not
this is
plan for the
about
worst.
communicable diseases, not about COVID?
it is literally a COVID supplemental grant.
I know that, I know you're
Commissioner
fixated on the title of it, and what you may think is involved, but I think anything that gives us the opportunity to have emergency funding, why would we reject it when we're gonna, if the alternative is to put that on the backs of the taxpayers, which makes zero sense to me.
It's already on the backs of the taxpayers. That's
Well,
what
you're
grant
talking,
funding
you're talking about
comes from.
accessing our general fund,
That's
which we've
already-
had a long discussion about DTRF, how are we gonna finance the rent payments? And then you're talking about tapping into contingency fund, which is a general fund, which comes from Ottawa County taxpayers directly, instead of just accepting a grant that the state's offering.
How did you fund it the last time?
What's that?
How did you fund your COVID response the last time before there were dollars available?
We had dollars available.
But you wouldn't have had a grant available, remember, at the time when,
Okay, she's asking how did you fund it last time when you had needs in the county and no COVID grants?
We had grants that came through later on.
Later on, how did you fund it at the time?
At the time, we funded it with the dollars that we had.
Okay, well, considering the fact that I do not expect any COVID emergencies or other similar emergencies with
So you're looking
communicable
to-
diseases, I think it would be safe and prudent to reject the grant and not pre-plan ahead to use it for an emergency.
Could I just ask a question? Is Karen around?
I don't know if she
Karen,
is.
do you have information about this that we could have a little bit more background on what this grant actually does? 900,000 is a lot of money just to, at the last minute, as Jacob says, to say, we don't want that.
Welcome.
So I only, my understanding is really what's shared with me through public health.
Okay,
And
that may be
through-
information that, we would love to hear, so.
So there was a department meeting with the county administrator and the department director in which we reviewed their budget. This grant is funded with federal dollars passed through the state, which have that COVID identifier. It is for communicable disease. The other grant, it is a different title. It does come from the same funding source. As I understand it, there's a list of things that could come up in the public health world. I think Addie comes to Health and Human Services and talks to you about them all the time. And
Karen, wasn't monkeypox one of the things that she talked about?
monkeypox,
last summer.
measles, TB.
Whooping cough is one of
But-
them.
no, we haven't had that information at the HHS meeting. I very specifically
About
remember
whooping cough.
that. We have
I
not.
I remember TB from, it's been a few years. Only, and we didn't have a grant like this, but so there is a CD cost center that is a part of essential local public health services. And they provide ongoing activity. And this is really for the over and above. And so, as I understand it, we validate that whatever occurs is eligible, and staff could, the over and above, charge their time there. So I suppose what people, might be most familiar with is COVID, but this is really, I just remember that Dr. Heidel with TB patients, it was time intensive and to charge time to something like this. And it would be overhead. That would be mostly administrative overhead, mostly because a lot of the staff that are already doing CD work are not eligible under this grant because that's what they do every day. And they're already in a grant paying for that. So it's the benefit is in a significant response, as I understand it. But again, the health director is really much more versed in
Yeah.
the grant and the outbreaks.
You know, in the world that we live in, it's money that buys you options. If you don't have money, you have fewer options. I think where we come from, we don't always know what's around the corner. It's our job to do our best to see around corners. But I would rather have the money accessible to us and not need it than to need it and not have it accessible to us. Plus, at this very late hour, I don't think it makes sense to make a change like this that could be adjusted later on. I just have some severe concerns that we're not considering all of the ramifications that could happen by saying no to this right now, when it's not an emergency decision to make at this moment. So I don't think that this is something that we should take up. And I think we need to pass it as is because we want every option available to help care for the people of Ottawa County.
Commissioner Miedema?
I have just a couple things. One, do you have any idea, Karen? Sorry. Do you have any idea what the timeline is to apply for that grant? Like when the deadline is? I know I'm put you on the spot,
Yeah,
so.
so this is a part of a contract with the state and the health department. And so it's not an application. There's a number of programs that are funded in the contract. And it's a system, it's a state system for grants. So it's really, you apply, how do I say this? Sometimes it's what's approved, the contract, whatever's approved by the board, we would have to almost approve it, and then the state would adjust our contract amount because the state's already identified these as amounts. And so let's say there's grant amounts out there for, I don't know, $2 million. I'm just being completely fictitious. And we would approve those grants and let's say they might, at this level, get approved for 1.9. And then we would actually have to go, last year, that was a perfect example, when that grant wasn't approved. We actually had to approve it in the system, and then the state had to do an amendment, and then we had to approve the amendment, which reduced the amount. So it's actually part of that contract, and that a contract is just presented. It's not an application.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Karen. The other thing from what I'm hearing, and other commissioners, I guess, can weigh in, but from what I'm hearing that's been shared with us, it's a grant intended to go over and above truly for the use of something such as what we experienced during 2020. So from my point of view, I think it's actually more responsible to turn it down because it's otherwise continually funding something that we don't necessarily need to have. And the more that county boards do that across the entire nation, if we actually turned it down, we're actually saving taxpayer dollars, keeping it in their own pockets over time. Where if we continue saying yes, year after year after year, it becomes something from the federal government that we're depending on that we don't necessarily need to depend on. So that would be how I'm That's my
So-
current interpretation.
So if I could, just one.
We'll go to,
My understanding is, Mr. Chair, you have businesses and you yourself applied for COVID money and received it. And I don't think you planned for that. I don't think you knew that you were going to need that to keep your folks employed.
right, that was the government doing that, yeah. shutting
Correct,
down
but
the
you
economy.
took advantage of it for your company and
Yeah,
you didn't know that you needed it.
during an emergency, during a shutdown, yeah.
You don't know what's coming down around the corner.
Do you think are you saying you think we're going to have another shutdown?
I don't know if we have a
Maybe-
nuclear attack. I don't
maybe-
know what is coming around the corner. I mean, you can see the news just like I can.
Yeah. Commissioner Cosby was next. We'll keep going.
Yeah, that's why metrics, I think, are really important in some of our primary diseases here in the county. I've been asking for them for 20 months, I think. Because I'm trying to find a case of monkeypox here and I'm not finding it. In avian flu, they say it's more like pink eye. So, it's like how much money we would actually need to follow and treat, very different than tuberculosis. And it does make sense that we have a separate budget for that. It takes approximately a year to treat and it's very expensive. Compliance is a big issue with the medications, but that money in this particular grant wouldn't be used necessarily for tuberculosis unless, of course, with our newcomers, that we might see an uptick in that. That's why I've been curious to see what's coming across the border. But I don't think, before, because I was part of the COVID response in this county, that the county necessarily had an outlay of money initially when we had COVID. I think that was handled at the private level. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it was.
Commissioner Kleinens was next. I'll come back to you, Commissioner Rhodey.
So again, not having been here for what was, I'm sure, a saucy conversation last time. I've heard a few different interpretations of what this thing is supposed to do. I've heard thus far from the chair that it's for you, it's an infection prevention grant that can be used for training, but then I was just told that it was specifically for things above and beyond. I have a very difficult time feeling we should vote one way or another until we find out what the grant does a little more. I'm not on HHS, so I don't, know how it got to this point without, someone noting it before, because it's not like this is all new information. But at this point, I think a little clarity as to what this thing does is necessary, but what it's attached to can't be held up, nor can it be reinserted if after a discussion, it's determined that it is something that we'd like to avail ourselves of. So I agree with Commissioner Bonema that we pass this as is and then readdress it at reappropriate or at some point down the road. But right now, this thing does just about everything except wash your car.
Okay, Commissioner Rhodey.
Yes, I would agree with Commissioner Cosby on how metrics would be incredibly helpful when we're making decisions like this. And so I agree with you that, it would be great to actually have those so that we know what kinds of situations we're actually dealing with here in the county. And then also, I think that, should an emergency happen, the best case scenario is because of the tyranny and the kind of things that this county experienced during the COVID pandemic, the best scenario would be to have accountability should this ever happen again. And the best possibility for accountability is to have a health department that's coming back and asking for finances to do certain functions that are necessary. And I think if there's just a broad bank account that's just available to do whatever they wish to, there's less accountability. So I would prefer actually more communication, more requests for funding.
Just to.
I would agree with that. Commissioner Zylstra.
A quick follow-up. So are you saying that if there were an emergency, that health department should come to us and ask for general fund dollars to handle emergency when we could have accepted a federal grant that would have given them the ability to do that?
That's definitely not what Commissioner Rhodey is saying,
I
but good
just
try,
question,
Commissioner
because I'm
Faustra.
I'm not clear as to what, if health has come to ask us for money, and we've already turned down this federal grant, well, we can't go back and ask for the federal grant because we've already turned it down, so where are we gonna get the funding from other than from general funds?
So assuming for a moment that there's another national emergency or significant event,
Mhm.
and there's a need for additional funds outside of what's already budgeted, 17 million, $18 million for the health department. If in that case, there was a request, and let's say they needed to hire, 40 people to do contact tracing through all the schools and make sure that the kids are sitting 6 feet apart, right? Let's just say they had to do that. Then they would, what Commissioner Rhodey is saying is they would need to come to the board in a public meeting and explain the metrics and the reasons for the request.
Okay.
And if at that point, the board looked at the information and said, yeah, I think we should be contact tracing kids. I think we should make sure they're 6 feet apart. I think there's this horrible outbreak. And maybe we should even threaten to put people in jail, shut down schools, close businesses. Then the board can vote. And at least then, the board member's vote is on the record.
Okay, but you're saying that the board member would vote with taxpayers' dollars from Ottawa County as opposed to have taken the grant beforehand?
Considering the fact that the federal government is working so hard to incentivize COVID spending, my thought is there would be funds flowing freely from the federal government. And so it would not be taxpayer dollars from the general fund. It would likely
But
be
you couldn't guarantee that,
taxpayer
right?
funds
You couldn't
from
guarantee
the
that.
federal government.
But you couldn't guarantee that.
Life is not about guarantees, Commissioner Zalstra.
But if we accept
It's
the
about,
grant, then we have that guarantee of 900,000.
it's about doing what's right and making the calls that you need to make as a board. It's about deciding what you're going to incentivize and what you're going to prioritize. I want to prioritize the existing work of the health department and all the various things they do, vision, hearing, wastewater, everything else, and let them do their work and do it with excellence. And since removing this grant doesn't impact their day-to-day work, I don't think we need more federal COVID dollars. Do you?
Again, can I just say something? I know you don't like COVID. None of us like COVID.
Well, I'm
but
just
accepting
asking.
this grant does not mean that we will have COVID or not, right?
Do you think that I'm saying that accepting this grant will produce COVID?
I get that perception. Maybe I'm wrong, but what we're saying is, there's $900,000 that we can accept. My understanding is we don't get the cash until we need it.
No, we get the cash.
Okay.
And then they have a slush fund of $900,000.
Okay, that is not my perception. That is why it is a contingency emergency grant, but
Mr. Chairman, I think this has gone round and round.
It has. Let's go to
just-
Commissioner Cosby next.
I'd
Let's
like
go
to
to
call the
Commissioner
question.
Cosby
I
and
just want
then
to point out something that never gets talked about, and it really does need to be talked about, especially in circumstances like this. We have an emergency preparedness department here at the county. This is actually their work. It truly is. And it came into fruition, not just at the county, but after 9/11 in the Department of Homeland Security. So we have far more resources than what we tapped into during the last COVID pandemic. Call it whatever you want. And I've talked to Lou Hunt, and Lou Hunt said that we will step up definitely differently than what we did in the past. And I don't think Lou was here at the county at the time of the COVID outbreak. But something to consider. So it's not just a health department. It's one piece of a bigger puzzle that we need to put together to respond to our community appropriately and keep it safe.
Yep, Commissioner Belknap.
I just had a comment. $900,000 and it's sort of like it's available now. What happens if, by February, we've spent 400,000 and then there's an emergency? We're going to be asking for, help, right? If the state comes down and says, X, Y, and Z is going to solve this issue for you and here's another, pot of money that you can tap into.
Yes, the federal government and the state does seem to have an unlimited supply of money. Commissioner Miedemann.
You can take it however you want, but I find it very ironic that here we are a year later 1 week, 1 week ago, this came before us as an addition to the budget request. And the main topic last year was along this. It's just interesting timing. It's just something I'm taking note of while we're in the middle of these discussions. And you can take it for whatever you want to take that. It's just interesting.
Good news is I have not heard that there are any emergencies on the horizon or that we're going to need the $900,000, which is great. We didn't need it this year. Excellent. I don't assume we're going to need it in the future either.
Mr. Chairman, a few minutes ago, I called for the question.
So I'm going to just make a motion then that we amend the resolution by removing the $900,000 COVID grant.
I would second that motion.
Is there any discussion on that motion? Any additional discussion?
Could I make a suggestion?
Absolutely, yeah.
Obviously, this is an option. The budget is adopted by department, by fund. And we do have a contingency in the general fund. We could move this grant, assuming that's allowable, to the general fund, to a separate cost center, and under the contingency. And then it would take, because what I heard you say, you wanted the board to vote. That's what I heard. If there is money available to do something, you wanted the health department to come and ask and present their case, and you wanted the vote on the record in a very public way, transparent. So they would have the option to do that, and you would also have the option
Great.
to have the contingency.
A great suggestion. I'd love to hear thoughts on that. I personally am opposed to accepting COVID grants, but I'd love to hear other board members.
Well, my understanding from you, if I could be recognized, that your desire is really to hold the power on this money.
No, my desire is that the government would stop funding COVID.
No, that if
and-
there's a
and that-
response, that the health department would then come to us asking for money to respond. That's what I'm hearing is you want to have the power to be, that the board has the yay or nay on that. It really comes down to the control of the money. And this is how you can control the health department's response to prevent that from happening. So what Karen is presenting is a nice hybrid solution that's reasonable, that in my conversations with the health department, they've said, we had never been through a pandemic before. We didn't know what a response would look like. We learned a lot of things that we may consider doing again and a whole lot of things that we would not do again. We learned that local authorities would not enforce mask mandates, right? We learned that that was a misuse of funds or a misunderstood expectation that actually would happen. So they learned a lot. We learned a lot. We've all gone through this together. But to just give up this money, not fully doing an impact study or understanding what are the full ramifications of it in the 11th hour right now, when we can obviously move this to a different meeting, makes sense to me, or do what Karen is suggesting and set it aside so that it's here and that they would come to the board for our approval process. And to me, that is a nice meet in the middle.
Commissioner Miedema,
Commissioner Miedema, did you have
would
something?
you repeat what you said as far as the grant request timing? I think I didn't hear it very well.
Do you mean when I was referring to every time a county, are you talking about when I was talking about if every county continues to approve funding of the grants? Is
I
the
think
the
there's
comment?
within the last week. Is that what I heard you say? Or maybe I just misheard.
Well, it came up at the meeting last week.
Well, I just thought it was interesting timing that this request was made by the health department a week ago, but it wasn't included in the regular budget process.
That's what I
And
wanted
that
you
was
to
what
repeat.
was interesting to me because this is where we were last year dealing with the same topic. And it's just interesting that it chose to be the topic yet again for the second year in a row. And the timing was quite interesting to me of why would that happen?
If it helps, I don't believe that it was, I don't believe the grant request was last week, but knowledge of it was brought to the board.
Karen,
I
is
don't
there a
know.
timing issue with the grant? I mean, if we don't approve it right now, is there any reason why we can't request that grant later? Does it have to be part of this budget package?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Commissioner Miedema.
While I appreciate Karen's suggestion, I guess my current thought is still what I was sharing earlier, in that every time that a county continues to say that it wants a grant that it doesn't need, then that money does come out of our taxpayer dollar pockets one way or the other, whether it's local, state, federal, it still comes out of our pockets. And for me, that is my top reason why I am not for saying yes to this at this point in time. Because even if we moved it into what Karen was saying, that's still approving that and having those dollars saying to the federal government, we value this particular grant. And from my point of view, I don't, I guess, put a lot of value into it unless it's something that a COVID emergency came, and I believe that I believe our federal government would see that they need to fund the local levels at that point. That's
Commissioner Zalstra.
Okay, a quick question, Karen, do we need any, if we were to go with your suggestion, do we need to do anything different here? Or is that something that you could take care of as far as separating the funds and setting them in?
No, either option changes the resolution.
Oh, okay, right. I guess I'd just like to go back to the idea of need and necessary. We don't know the future, right? So
Right.
I think what Karen is saying makes sense to me. It does, as Jacob says, satisfy one of the chair's requirements that, the board have control over disbursement. So, I do think it is a good hybrid solution, so.
Yeah, I would concur with you in that point, Commissioner Zalstra. It's not the main reason that I don't like the continued COVID grants and COVID spending. My analysis would really fall much more in line with Commissioner Miedema, that I don't think that the federal government, the state government, or the county government should continue sending taxpayer dollars for what may or may not be needed in the future. And I think we can pretty safely say is not going to be needed, because the type of emergency funding that this was used for was a once in 100 years pandemic. So I'm not expecting a big need for this. The county does actually have a balanced budget and a lot of cash. I don't know the exact number, maybe $200 million or something like that. And so I would rather not accept it and set an example for other counties in Michigan to say, please stop accepting all this federal money if you don't have to, especially the COVID money. They're just going to keep pouring it in, year after year, pushing a specific type of agenda. That's what grants are used for.
I understand that point, and I empathize with that point. At the same time, I want to make an informed decision tonight, and it's hard to sit here and vote on this at the 11th hour when there's no emergency preventing us from making this decision after we've had a little bit of time to collaborate with some of our other peers to make an informed decision. So I'm purely asking that we pass it as is, and then we revisit this issue in the coming weeks. We have time to do that.
What would change in the coming weeks?
I just explained it. A chance to collaborate with the directors that we depend upon and people in the community to weigh in on this, because this is, like I said, an 11th hour change. And this may have unintended consequences that we're not considering at this very moment. And I want to make sure that we don't get this wrong. So I just would ask that we would have a little bit more time. I don't think there's any harm in that.
Well, there is some harm, because if it gets approved tonight, then it's approved.
That's not harm.
And they're going to
We
go ahead.
decide if the money gets spent or not. We're in control. We're the board.
Get the funds. So it's on the back of the backs of the
The,
taxpayers.
the money is, if you understand how federal government money works,
If
the
you
money's there.
understand,
I
if you
understand that during
understand.
COVID.
I'm assuming
there
you
was
do.
Tons of money that was flowing out.
The money is out
Oh.
there no matter what. It's
Right,
whether we have
exactly.
access to it as an option or not.
Kind of
And I
sounds
don't
like
know,
the public comment that someone made about Phil Kyers, just take the grants, just take the grants.
no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'd like to not make this decision at the very last second. That's what I'm saying.
I wouldn't like to make the decision, at this meeting either, but
Then let's not.
no metrics were brought to us for 20 months or whatever. Information was not brought about this earlier. Whose responsibility is that? Well, it's the departments to work with.
But do you understand this is for infection
finance.
prevention?
It's literally.
We don't know
an
what,
extra COVID grant. I mean, for $900,000, the same one that we rejected a year ago.
Call to
you
question.
benefited from this.
Bodie, and then we'll go to a vote.
Than to have the figures of the amounts that were budgeted for communicable disease for last year, and then for this year, separate from this.
Sure, they were about 400,000.
It's the same amount essentially.
No, but yeah, they're similar.
Okay,
yeah.
which one is lower?
2025 is slightly lower than 2024.
So could that perhaps signify that they didn't quite need as much as they had last year?
That's what the budget says. Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so the motion, Commissioner Kleinens, you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to add something?
Again, I agree that this is a passionate subject. However, the reason, again, I would like to defer removing this at this point is that at this point, I do not even understand your description of what this money is supposed to do is entirely different from what her description of this money is supposed to do, which we all grabbed onto quite nicely, I want to point out. If this is meant, and I would defer again to the medical opinion to my left, that infection is a wide-ranging group of things that can probably cause you harm. If it's an infection prevention piece, it covers a myriad of things, none of which have to show up in large quantities. It can be fibers, I'm thinking, foodborne illness, raw sewage spill, chemical release. There are a number of things that I would like our health department to be able to access this for if it's for training, which is what you seem to indicate it was for. So, I mean, my conundrum here is that, it's here now. How it got here is, that's kind of secondary to me because I want to know I'd like to see the language to know what it does. Because right now, all I'm going off of is everybody's presumption of what it does. And that's not a suitable reason for me to vote to remove it. I'm sorry.
Okay, anybody else? Good discussion. The motion on the table is to amend the budget resolution to remove the $900,000 COVID grant. I'm happy to entertain a little more discussion before we go to a vote. Commissioner Cosby, you look like you want to say something.
I do, and I'm trying to formulate exactly what it is I want to say. I wish I had the grant in front of me to see what it obligates us to.
Would you like to take a recess?
And is that a possibility in the timing on it? So, can we pass a budget without it, but consider later?
Sure, right.
Once we
Why don't we put the
understand.
onus on the health department to, if they have a need, there's no positions tied to it, there's no people tied to it.
Right.
It's
just additional
extra
funding in the
money.
event that we need it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying, we're not necessarily voting that we are outright rejecting this grant forever, but we would be removing it from the budget and we can gather more information.
Correct. If there is no, time requirements right now,
It
it
would-
must be passed this evening or foregone, then
It would probably need to come up in the next 2 weeks.
Is that the deadline?
Would that give you?
is my guess.
That's what I would like to
Next
check
2
on.
to 4
is see what
weeks.
The deadline is.
You'd have to have it. The state's going through its budget process too, so.
I think if we could take a recess to verify a deadline, that sounds like an important detail for us to know.
Is that something we can do?
I mean,
Could try.
you're talking about trying to get a deadline from the state. I mean, if we go and,
Well, it's a grant application, correct? We've filled out a grant application. Or we have not applied
No,
for it
it's-
yet.
It's not an application. This isn't an application process. This is a contract that public health receives annually from the state.
But we would be able to
For
see it
many
in contract
programs.
form, grant form.
I don't know the whole schedule. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Oh,
I
I'm
just
not
don't know.
asking you, but I'm wondering if that's something that we could get internally.
I don't think this is something we should guess at. I think we should make an informed decision on this. We need to know that deadline.
I just don't know where I'd go get it. Unless.
Within
I
our ability to
submit a
find
contract.
out, let's just find out.
so Commissioner Kleinens wanted to read some of the grant language. Would you still like to do that?
Yeah.
Entertain a motion for a recess?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of recess, please say aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carried. I'll take a short recess. I'm going to call the meeting back to order. Okay, all right, call this meeting back to order. And look to pick up where we left off. We were looking at some grant language. Commissioner Kleinens, did you have time to kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
review some of that?
Yeah,
Okay,
and I
great,
had some lovely conversation.
great. All right, did we figure out why the county should continue to accept federal COVID grant dollars?
I think Karen is ready to give us some of the information we were looking for.
Welcome, Karen.
Hello. So I talked to Addie Hembley at the break, and she clarified, and this is, or confirmed, this is a grant that is part of their contract. So how that works is that once this budget is adopted, this grant, as I said, would be effective 10/1. The state will be very anxious for us to go in and go into their system and get everything set up so that they can finalize our contract and they can finalize all the agreements with us. At that point, depending on the outcome of this discussion, we would make adjustments and reflect that in our contract. If the grant is not approved, we would share that, and it may or may not be available if we need it later. So there's not like it's they hold it for us. It's not. It may be there or it may not be. And it's not a grant like we're very used to, very rigid deadlines apply by the state. Their reporting deadlines are very rigid, but I think this is really, they're just finalizing their contract with us. So they will be very anxious to do that after
Yes.
October 1st.
And do you know approximately how large the amount of the contract is in general? Like a rough number?
I did.
Like $1 million or like five or 10?
No, it's I don't want to quote a number, but it's more than $1 million.
But all
Oh,
the-
wait, it's the one that they added. So it was 1.3 and they gave us about 750,000. So I think it's right around 2 million.
Okay. Commissioner Cosby?
Yeah, because this is,
In the current year, so.
Yeah, that's okay, yeah. My point is there's other funding and this is above and beyond.
This might be over and above that because, so
Right.
maybe.
I'm wondering if this is new work, because it's healthcare associated infections primarily is what it's talking about here. So, being in a healthcare setting, and some of, antibiotic resistant organisms, HIV, sexually transmitted diseases, hepatitis C, foodborne outbreak, TB. I mean, some of these things we're already going to have a line item for, but I guess it's that health care associated infections. I don't know if our local health department's done that work before, if that hasn't been something handled through the state when we have outbreaks, and we do.
You sound like you have a lot of questions that Director Hammond.
Yeah, I know you
I'm
don't
sorry,
know
I
that.
can't answer that.
Yeah.
This is, and I misspoke, that is our ELPHS funding. So the 2 million is our ELPHS funding, which is a smaller portion of their grant funding from the state. So there's probably, it exceeds that amount, their contract, so.
Yeah,
And
the
if there's
work,
some-
This would be
the
over
work
and above
that's,
that.
yeah, this would be above and beyond what is already budgeted, already committed for personnel. They already have a specific budget that includes wastewater, vision, hearing, sexually transmitted diseases, communicable disease. This is additional COVID spending that keeps coming from the federal government via, I think, the CDC. I think. Commissioner Miedema.
Commissioner Rhodey asked a question too, I think earlier, and it was about what our communicable disease line item had been last year compared to this year. Can you guys remind me of what the change in that was?
Sure, last year was about 440,000 in that line item, and this year it's 390 or so,
That's the general fund.
just the general fund.
Right,
Yeah.
but just,
Commitment.
again, I appreciated that information because it suggests that there potentially wasn't as much of a projected need there.
And this is, I mean, it's speaking to cross-training in communicable disease investigation activities too. So that's why a number 2, why that's being, some of those items are being listed. But it is healthcare associated infections is what they're looking at. It would be, I mean, do we have any problem with just being able to ask Adeline more questions regarding this? Not turning it down necessarily, just in, you know, if, is that something that we can do? Because is there something downstream that they're seeing that we don't know about that, you know, will need financial support? I'd just like to make a more informed decision.
So I'd consider the source personally. We know where the money's coming from. We know the purpose of it. And, you know, if the board wants to accept the funding, you know, then it can. I don't think it needs to, as this is additional funding that's not planned for anything in particular. Mr. Kleinian.
I mean, I guess reading this, it is planned. I mean, this is entirely an educational budget. It's not, it's meant to be used for education on those things that are associated. Now, you know, I'm curious as to what spread out across all the departments, the education budget is for the health department, and whether this is an enhancement to that, not a replacement. Because, you know, it's the things that are referred to it, I mean, as far as, and the fact that it has, you know, infections investigations that can benefit from infection prevention support. There are new infections are constantly occurring as things become antibiotic resistant. So in my, you know, from my very layman's, not a medical person opinion, this is just going to make our people better, and it's meant to create statewide capacity so that we as a state can deal with this, not just us as a county.
If I could remind you what it's for, if that would help. It's healthcare associated and antibiotic resistant organisms, STDs or
No, that's
STIs.
Not all of it. No.
That's literally, I'm reading from the grant
That's
document.
allowable, but no.
Right.
Or that's the
HIV.
cross-training. So what it's actually
Yep.
for, as I'm reading it, is HAIs. And so, you know, in the nursing home setting, in hospice, I mean, you know, it's like, these were our most vulnerable people during COVID. And I'm not saying it's COVID. That's not what I'm talking, but we lack in people were sent back positive, and that's how our death rates, our mortality rates went up. Let's be honest. We lack isolation in those settings as well. So there's response in here as well. It's not just education, there's response as well, investigations and response. So that's why I would like to just know a little bit more to see if there's something that we're not aware of that's, you know, kind of downstream that we need to be prepared for.
I would have thought that there would have been reports of that in HHS, but that's just me. Upcoming emergencies. Anybody else?
Call the question.
Okay, we got a request to vote. Anyone else before we go? Current motion on the table is to amend the resolution by removing the $900,000 COVID grant. Can we go to the clerk for a vote on this?
Ms. Cosby.
First. Could you repeat the motion again?
So the motion on the table is to vote to remove
Just,
the $900,000 COVID grant from the budget.
could you just clarify and just make sure the motion reflects the actual project itself, the ELC Infection Prevention and Healthcare Associated Infections Response Support? That is the name of
Yes.
the project?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
So I'm going to vote yes, but I would like an opportunity to review this grant in the future for potential approval.
Well, that's.
Ms. Cosby,
Said yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yeah, no.
Mr. Zylstra,
No.
Mr. Bonema,
No.
Mrs. Wenzel, Mrs. Medema,
Yes.
Mr. Kleinjans.
No.
Mr. Belknap.
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey,
Yes, and I agree with Gretchen. on
Mr.
that.
Moss.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, so the motion to remove the 900,000 COVID grant passed, and I am definitely hearing that commissioners would like to hear any additional information on potential needs for that grant. I guess I'd add a little commentary that perhaps there is something specific that might be needed. Perhaps if there's something specific, like a $50,000 need or a $100,000 need or a $150,000 need, something with more detail, would be excellent to hear. Or maybe it's $900,000.
Mr. Chair.
I don't know.
Mr.
But
Chair.
that, I'm thankful for the feedback. Commissioner Bonema.
I think if I heard correctly from Karen in her conversation with Adeline Hambley, that there is a deadline of our fiscal year to make this decision. I just want to make sure that I understand that deadline correctly, because if we're saying we're going to have another opportunity to take a look at this, as Commissioner Cosby requested, and I agree with, I don't know that we will have an opportunity. So could we just check with Karen one more time if her understanding is that we do still have time to review this grant?
Karen, do you know what would happen if we look at this over the next 2 weeks offhand? I mean, I kind of doubt the state is just going to cut off the funding, but they're incentivizing this spending. They want to give it out, but
So there's a finance committee on October 1.
mhm.
If you'd like to look at it at that time, if there's a budget amendment
Sure.
at that time,
We could invite
I think that we could still
the health officer
let
to the finance committee for this specific discussion.
or if she had, however that.
A
however that
representative.
works, right.
Yeah.
Or provide a report or anything. I mean, I don't think anyone's against the activities that are described in this document, in the grant document. It's talking about staffing and personnel time and responding to infection.
I'd like to know about the work, the HAI work that they do at the local level. I'm not aware of that. It's been a little while since I've been in the business, so, there may be changes that have occurred. I want to know incident rates. What are we seeing? Is there, a particular concern regarding our nursing facilities, skilled facilities, hospice care? Are we prepared for an outbreak of any sort? Because we were not prepared during COVID. So some of the questions I might have going forward, and at the finance committee, if we could bring that up, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if needed, work quickly to, respond. Well, we do what we're responsible to do. Any other discussion on the budget? Any other items? Any related thoughts?
I think I asked for an update on the implementation of our new budgeting software, and I understand that there's been some issues with making that happen. And I know that Administrator Gibbs set an expectation that we would have increased transparency because of that software. It appears that there's been a delay in being able to provide that increased transparency. So hopefully that can get resolved soon so that we can get better answers to some of the questions that we have in a timelier basis.
Commissioner Medema?
I recall hearing that discussion a little different in that we were going to be using the software for budget year 26, not
Because
for
of the delays. Yeah.
No. When we actually approved the budget software, it was announced to us that we would not be seeing it as a board, the new changes, until 26. They were going to start working on it behind the scenes in the fiscal department, but that it wouldn't be something we would notice in the general public or as the board, that we would actually have access to some of the information of how it's designed. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what my memory,
Yeah.
that's
it's-
what I recall.
That's what I recall too. Yeah. And there was discussion on, how it would give more, visibility and transparency to residents, but would take time to implement because, it's a very large change for the county. Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I think it's going to be great.
There have
for
been
this-
issues. I mean, there
Oh.
have been
There's
issues.
always issues when
Yeah,
you, you
it's-
transition from
so-
budget software products. There always is. It's even just that learning curve that goes along with it. But
Well, I think that's why
I
they
think they're putting
planned.
historical data in at the same
Yeah.
time they were training, if I remember correctly, Karen. So, yeah, it just.
That's
and
why there
it-
was a long
short-
timeline.
Yes.
Probably also not to set improper expectations, probably too.
Hmm.
Yeah, because I know everybody, wants to see it, yeah. Yep. Anything else? Anything else budget related? Any? No? Okay. The current motion then is to adopt the budget resolution as amended. I guess let's go to the clerk.
Mr. Belknap,
Yes.
Ms. Cosby,
Yes.
Mr. Bonema,
No.
Mrs. Rhodey,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mrs. Wenzel,
Yes.
Mrs. Miedema,
Yes.
Mr. Kleinians.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
and Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we will move to 8B, the purchasing card policy, second reading. Could I please get a motion to approve the revised purchasing card policy?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and support. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, let's just go to the clerk for a vote on this one as well.
Sure. Mr. Bonema,
Yes.
Mr. Kleinians.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mrs. Miedema,
Yes.
Mrs. Wenzel,
Yes.
Ms. Cosby,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Belknap,
Yes.
and Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we would go to 8C, resolution approving changes to the Grand Valley Metro. The suggested motion is to approve a resolution to add Blendon Township as a member community to the Grand Valley Metro Council.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and support. Any discussion? Okay,
Just a quick comment.
yes, go for it.
This is just indicator that our greater Grand Rapids urbanized area is growing into Ottawa County.
Hmm.
So, and I think that's a good thing is there's a little bit more tools in the toolbox then as far as, community partnering and regional planning initiatives and that sort of thing.
All right, we go to the clerk for a vote on that one.
Sure. Mr. Belknap,
Yes.
Mrs. Miedema,
Yes.
Mrs. Wenzel,
Yes.
Ms. Cosby,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
Yes.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Bonema,
Yes.
Mrs. Rhodey,
Yes.
Mr. Kleinians.
Yes.
And Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, next up would be 8D, the litigation resolution. The suggested motion is to approve a resolution which dissolves the special committee for Kimball v. Ottawa County, creates a special committee for Kramer v. Ottawa County. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and support. Any discussion? Commissioner Zylstra.
Thank you, appreciate that. So I do appreciate the chair being willing to serve on this committee, but I am concerned that in the underlying lawsuit, the chair is being named individually and officially. That does strike me as problematic, and maybe you'd like to address that, because I think there are some lingering questions about, is it the right move to have you on that committee?
Sure, I'll go to corporate counsel. Any commentary on the lawsuit or the litigation resolution?
As I said earlier to another member of the commission, that there is no conflict of interest by Commissioner Moss serving on this subcommittee. We have had other situations where commissioners have been sued in their official and individual capacity. But Commissioner Moss was acting in the color of his employment as a commissioner. So there is no conflict of interest.
Okay, I guess I'm not, you know, necessarily differing with you on that one. I guess, you know, there's 11 commissioners here and it's only a 3-member committee. So, you know I have concerns and I don't know if others have concerns, but it seems out of 11-member committee and 11-member board, and we only need 3 members, you know, maybe we can address that in a better way. Other than to have, you know, someone who is named, and I understand lawsuits are lawsuits and you didn't ask to be named. I get that. You know,
Are you opposed to not serving on it?
I would like to serve on it, yeah. Mhm. Any other comments, any other discussion?
What would be the reason that you want to serve on it?
I am currently the board chair, and I would like to serve on it as the board chair.
Okay, other than that, you're the board chair, is there another reason?
No?
I guess what maybe Jacob is trying to say this, and I guess, you know, my concerns would be, you know, if someone's being named personally and officially and also sitting on the settlement committee, I think residents may have concerns about that. People have expressed concerns to me that, you know, hey, the same person shouldn't be doing both. And I would hope that maybe you would absent yourself from this. I understand you're the chair and I understand you would be the chair of this committee. But I guess we're asking you to absent yourself, and as, you know, corporate counsel says, you don't have to, according to the way they see that, but.
Are the people who are speaking to you, sharing their concerns, are they the same people who call us corrupt, foolish, absurd, incompetent, ridiculous, stupid, and ignorant?
I don't think.
Do you think maybe they have a certain view
I think it's.
that they would automatically
I
not
think we're
want
just saying maybe Roger
me on the
Belknap would be
committee?
willing to serve and take the instance of liability away of this potentially
There
is not an issue,
there
but maybe
is-
Roger Belknap would serve.
There's no liability, Commissioner Bonema.
Well, that's an opinion. There could be. You are named in the suit and you're negotiating the settlement of the suit that you are named in with taxpayer dollars.
Commissioner Rhodey,
Is the plaintiff going to be part of this? Because perhaps they shouldn't be.
I would assume that they would be somehow involved. And often the parties who are involved have a hand in discussions. Yeah, yeah. So it would seem it would be very relevant to have the board chair who is also named, partially just because he is the board chair. And that's how lawsuits work. Yeah. So I see no issue.
I got a follow-up question, and I understand your position. I think, you know, Jacob and I have, you know, registered our disagreement on that one, but as corporate counsel says, they don't deem that there is a conflict of interest. On the settlement agreement itself, and maybe this is a question for corporate counsel, on a $225,000 settlement, is $75,000 for opposing counsel? Is that normal? That seems high. I mean, for Kimball to be getting 150 and his lawyers to be getting 75, I understand, you know, may have the arrangement that they have, but I don't know if that settlement was, could we have said, hey, 150 for Kimball and maybe 50 or 40 or 30 for opposing counsel? That just strikes me as a high number, but I'm not a lawyer.
I can't speak on behalf of Mr. Kimball and his attorney. I don't know what their arrangement was. So normally in a lawsuit, when they bring such an action, it could be a third of the amount. So, but that's all I can say.
Fair enough.
If you divide 75,000 by 225,000, the number is 8.33 repeating.
Right.
Yeah. I assume that, yeah. Anything else? We can go to the clerk for a vote on this one as well.
Mr. Bergman,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
No.
Mr. Belknap,
Can you repeat what the motion was?
To approve a resolution which dissolves the special committee for Kimball v. Ottawa County and creates a special committee for Kramer v. Ottawa County.
Yes.
Ms. Cosby,
Yes.
Mr. Kleinens,
No.
Mrs. Rhodey,
Yes.
Mrs. Medema,
Yes.
Mr. Bonema,
Yes.
Mrs. Wenzel,
Yes.
and Mr. Moss.
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Okay, up next is 8E, the Executive Transition Committee Resolution. The suggested motion is to approve a resolution to create an Executive Transition Committee for the position of County Administrator. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and support. Any discussion? Commissioner Bergman.
Mr. Chair, I would like to see us at least somewhere show that we are looking for an administrator with municipal experience, one. Also, I'm concerned about the fact that, once again, we're not using the HR department, which we should be using. We are. You're saying we are going to be using the HR department?
Well, I'm sure there will be involvement from HR as far as the job description, the recruitment profile. Absolutely.
Right.
I believe,
And they're gonna do the national search.
no, we would look to, if you look in here
They're
on,
gonna find somebody to do a national search for us.
if you
Is
look
that
at
correct?
item E, that would be engage in an independent recruiting agency to assist with the search, which would be open to any individual and would be a national search, yes.
Okay, all right. Good.
And in addition, I'd say it would be wise for the board and this committee to engage with a firm that has some level of national presence or does national searches. Yes,
All right, good.
yes.
Just making
Um,
sure.
For full transparency, during our recess, I interviewed a little bit with Matt. Thank you, Matt. And I said the exact same thing to him. I also, admittedly, from a personal standpoint, would love to see a candidate from the West Michigan area or candidates. We have a huge talent pool here in Ottawa, Kent, and the greater West Michigan area. But the search must be open to anyone. And we should consider anyone who applies, who has the experience and credentials needed. And any decision that's made should be based on merit and excellence.
So we're gonna make sure that we have someone with administrative background and municipal experience. Is that correct? Is that what I hear you saying?
So if we're going to be accepting applicants from across the United States,
Yep, we're gonna be looking at that, right?
yes.
Okay, good.
And
All right.
there's no way to guarantee that the people who apply will have municipal experience. They will definitely have administrative experience. That is the position. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Commissioner Zylstra, or should we go to Kleinens?
Go, Chris, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. In regards to the sequence, are these sequences in chronological order as far as how you propose to move forward with this?
In general, if you look at the resolution, I would say they're generally in chronological order. You'd want to do the job description and recruitment profile or update it, yeah, first, and then.
Okay, and so that is
Yeah.
somewhat different than organizations I've worked for when they're looking for a similar thing. You want your recruiting agency in at the inception because they are essentially going to guide the process, which does include, reviewing the job description and
Yes.
creating the template. So I mean,
Yes.
my concern is that bringing in an independent recruiting agency after you front loaded all this work might end up taking more time, because if that doesn't fit with the current template for a national search, then they're just gonna make you do it all over again. So-
That's a good point. So this is not written in chronological order, just in general, it needs to be done.
So is the intention to get an independent recruiting agency first through an RFP process or something through HR? I'm just trying to see this in my head, that's all.
I would think that the committee would seek an independent recruiting agency while also at the same time, it's that common phrase, walk and chew gum, right? Start working on the job description, the recruitment profile. They already exist, actually. And so, it just says review, like review and approve. Maybe there's some adjustments that need to be made, but those documents already exist. Yeah. And are currently in use. Yeah. Commissioner Zalstra.
Yeah, I guess to Chris's point, you know, I feel very uncomfortable going forward without having that contract in place. So I guess I'd like to make a motion to kind of complete that RFP process that Chris talked about, select a recruitment firm, and then present the board with a contract before we proceed further, right?
Are you motioning to table this item?
I would definitely like to have a contract in front of us before we go any further.
Okay, just need clarity on your motion. A motion to,
Well, having a contract in
'Cause
front
the
of us before we go
current-
any farther, yes.
okay, there's a motion to have a contract before going any further. Is there a second?
Second that.
Okay, is it,
I think it's important to start the process at the beginning. And the beginning is you need to come up with an organization that's going to help you in getting these prospective applicants. And one of the concerns that I have also with this process is you talk about you want to be transparent.
Hmm.
Well, I can assure you that if you want to be so transparent and open to the public with all these conversations, you're going to find is that there's going to be a lot of people aren't going to come forward and apply because they're in a job already and there's no way they want the public to realize that they're applying for a position. So you
That
have to
is-
take that into account.
that is the case always, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
most of them do not want it to be public that they're applying for this job.
That's right.
So
Yep.
you cannot have a public meeting and, talk with those people, interview those people.
If they've made it that far in the process, I'd hope that they're pretty committed. Yeah. Any other discussion? We have a motion on the table to have a contract in place before continuing.
So is this, sorry for clarification, Mr. Chair, is this an amendment to the motion to change the resolution to have the contract?
It's just
Or
a
is it
motion.
Separate, it's just a separate motion.
No, it's essentially to replace the main motion. So motion, it essentially tables the resolution, but it is to have a contract in place before continuing. Right? The way that I would see this going, and I take your feedback well, is the committee has several tasks it needs to do, has ideally, 5 members who can all work in conjunction on these, some of them ministerial related tasks, and then start the process. It would be great to do this now because Administrator Anderson is willing to continue the interim role. And the committee needs to continue the work of the Executive Transition Committee. We need one in place so we can continue. So.
Yeah, yes, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I don't doubt, this isn't a matter of competency, it's just I have a lot of friends in HR, and while we think we know how a thing sits, the HR world is so fluid that, even how descriptions are worded and laid out, all of that is it's very fluid, and if we want to have the best candidate, we need to kind of lead with someone who this is their jam, and
Yes,
would be
all the more reason to get started with this process now and not delay it weeks or months. I think that, we should, I think it'd be great if you withdraw your motion and we continue on with the process.
Well, I guess in all fairness, I mean, we could have started this process a long, long time ago. I mean, obviously, John Gibbs was not fired yesterday. He was fired quite a long time ago, so we could have.
Right.
I mean, so if you're talking about time crunch, I mean, in all fairness, this process could have started a long time ago. So I don't want to say, oh, because we have a time crunch, we have to truncate the process.
No one's saying that, Commissioner Zylstra. We're saying, what I'm saying is we should continue forward, acting as the Board of Commissioners, doing what we need to do.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we need to do is get a contract in front of us.
So that is
That's
what
the motion,
this,
I guess.
that is what this does, is empowers a executive transition committee to go through the process. in
I'm
open and
comfortable having a committee
transparent.
going forward without the contract, and that's, I guess, the motion, so.
Okay. Anything else?
Just
Any other
for
discussion?
clarity, we've not talked about this at all. Are you talking about a contract with the search firm?
Yes.
Okay.
Call the question.
Okay, so let's go to a vote. The motion on the table is to have a contract in place for the search firm before proceeding.
Yes. Have we named our search firm?
No, that would be part of
It
the RFP
specifically
process.
says in here that the committee would work to engage an independent recruiting agency to assist with the search.
And that still can happen.
Correct, yeah. That's why I'm recommending that Commissioner Zylstra withdraw the motion so we can continue with the process in an open and transparent manner.
No, open and transparent can totally happen, but without a contract in front of us with the search firm that we end up picking, I just, like Chris says, we're gonna be double backtracking anyway, so we might as
We're
well.
not
do it.
going to be double backtracking.
Okay.
We can, the board
it'll
members are not
naturally-
idiots, Commissioner Zylstra,
Okay, I mean, I'm just.
as your constituents have so clearly pointed out.
But I do think this will naturally occur. Once we, find a recruitment agency that we want to work with, then all these next steps will come into play.
So there's obviously a fee to
Call the
this.
question.
Pardon me?
There's obviously a fee to this search process. They're going to take a percentage of whatever.
Well, as we heard earlier this evening, there are fees to recruitment agencies, absolutely. And some do it hourly and some do it on the, as like percentage of the job. So
So
those things to be considered.
So I guess the discussion for me around this is.
There was a call to question.
Yeah, I don't think
Well,
it was a second
I
on that.
haven't had a chance to ask
Bonham,
a
go ahead
question
and
yet.
go ahead and wrap up and then we'll try to go to a vote.
Sure. No, I actually want to pay you a compliment. I want to say thank you for bringing more process to this process. The decision to fire Shay was a decision that the board as a whole was not made aware of before it was put before the board. The same decision to hire Gibbs did not have this process around it. The same decision to hire Anderson did not have this process around it. So I want to continue to say this is an important process. So my question in discussion around this is, I understand the need for this not to be made public because we may want to protect the anonymity of people who are applying, at least initially or early on. Since this is a responsibility for the entire board, could we be assured that there would be a recording of those interviews that just the board members would have access to be able to see the interviews taking place with the candidates so that we can participate virtually in a way to understand who's being interviewed, what questions are being asked, and that process would be transparent to the commissioners?
I think the answer in a word is yes, and it's also stated in the resolution that both the committee will provide weekly updates to the full board and that all applications will be provided to the full board. And I would fully support board members either seeing or sitting in or listening to public interviews. So, yeah, absolutely.
Public interviews, but I'm asking for, some of these interviews are going to happen behind closed doors. And if a recording can take place, I don't expect
I don't know
expect a
about
simple
that.
thing like being able to participate on this member all Ottawa Impact Commissioner Board. That's like asking a leopard to change his spots. You're not going to do that. What I'm asking for is to be able to at least see the process taking place as a commissioner. Not just me, but all commissioners have access to see that process take place.
Yes, I fully support that, and that is why trying to put it in writing, why it's written in this way, that, applicants are, interviewed in public and that the transition committee will provide all applications, all applications to the full Board of Commissioners and provide weekly updates.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah.
asking for that to be videoed so that we could see that.
So
That's not a normal part of our process, even with.
It actually is.
So,
We put an owl in
thank-
all of our committee meetings that I'm a part of.
so thank you, Commissioner Bonema. I support the idea of recording interviews, and we can absolutely, try to work that into a process. And if it fits, great. If there's a reason why we can't, okay. But my intention is to do public interviews as much as possible. Like,
I have the same
Right.
concerns that Commissioner Bergman has though as well, because when you do interview for another position, it's not and you're not guaranteed you're going to get the next one.
right, and this is why the Executive Transition Committee needs to make that a priority, that we balance those considerations and work with the recruiting firm, we work with HR, we work with administration and legal to help with that process, and then make it a process. Yeah. And there's a lot of detail in the resolution, but we can't spell out every single possibility. We're trying to create a good process. Commissioner Rhodey.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Commissioner Cosby, that we cannot begin with recording people from the very beginning, or people aren't going to apply in the first place. And so when it's appropriate, to have that interview process happen, then we do it. But
Well, can I just say, only people who are really committed to wanting the job are going to interview
right.
or even apply. So, in some ways, okay, we'll work to balance any privacy or confidentiality considerations, but at the same time, there is always, there's always a chance that someone might find out, and that's okay, because we're asking for commitment. We're asking for someone to come to Ottawa County to work as an administrator and to be here for 5 years or 10 years or longer. We're asking someone to commit.
That's.
I guess my question
So,
is, what if they don't get that position and then they've destroyed their current job?
That's right.
that is a huge leap. There's no, and again, these are the issues the committee needs to work through so we can balance confidentiality as much as possible. Otherwise, like, why don't we just not hire anybody? Like, maybe we just pull the plug, right? No, you work through it and you do your best. Yeah. Finance.
I guess I respect the idea that these delegated authorities aren't in chronological order, but point C, which is coordinate with the county administration to post the job by October the 1st, which is 7 days from now, kind of precludes that you're going to do A and B before you do, and probably D, before you do get to E. And every executive level search I've seen, applications are taken by the recruiting agency that is steering the entire process. So again, it does go back to Commissioner Zylstra's point that we do essentially need that piece in place before you can have those other pieces ready to roll, but until you've got a signed contract, you run the risk of not wasting money, but having to redo effort to get to the same place. And that's my concern, because I agree, you want to finish this expeditiously, but within
Good
there, it says
point.
that you've got a lot going on within the next 7 days.
Good point. I would move that we would strike the words by October 1, 2024 from the resolution. We give the board flexibility. If there's no support, then we'll let that.
No, I'll
Well,
support that for sure.
we have a
But
different
we still have the
motion
motion on the
table
floor.
still.
Oh,
Still,
First.
we still
we have
need to
two
go to a
motions.
You can bring that up afterwards, because
we'll come back to that. Okay, the current motion, well, let's go to a vote. Unless Commissioner Zylstra would like to withdraw his motion.
I would not
Okay.
like to, I would like a vote on this.
Is to stop the process until we have a contract in place for the recruiting firm. Could we go to the clerk?
Yes, sir. Mr. Zylstra.
Yes.
Mr. Bergman.
Yes.
Mr. Kleinian.
Yes.
Mr. Belknap.
No.
Ms. Cosby.
No.
Mrs. Medema.
No.
Mr. Bonema.
No.
Mrs. Rhodey.
No.
Mrs. Wenzel,
No.
and Mr. Moss.
No.
Motion fails.
Thank you. I'd like to request a motion then to strike the words by October 1, 2024 from the resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Is there discussion on that particular change? I agree with Commissioner Klein as it will provide a little bit of flexibility. Otherwise, it's too concrete, right? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, and motion carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Okay, we're going back to the main motion, which is to approve the resolution. Commissioner Zalstra.
Yeah, just a
more feedback.
Sorry, what?
More feedback, please.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you,
continue.
Sure. Just a couple of questions. Just kind of going back, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the independent recruiting agency, obviously, we're going to see a contract on that. Obviously,
Absolutely.
that will be brought to us before we go any farther, when that happens, right?
It will, this committee, if this is approved, would engage with that firm and would start the process, yes.
Yes, we've already committed by that motion failing to A and B happening. At some point, E will happen. At some point, there will be a contract that we will see.
There would absolutely have to be a contract.
Cool. I assume that was the answer. I just want to make sure that that was the answer.
Ye-
Mr. Estrada brought this up, and I do think this is valuable, to be it further resolved that received input from county commissioners, staff, and residents. I don't know what that means though concretely.
Which
Me,
part was that?
the-
Receive input?
Be it further resolved, the
Mhm.
Executive Transition Committee will receive input from county commissioners, staff, and residents.
Yeah.
What does that look like concretely? I know that in the past, in 2021, we had 4 members of the public. I know there was some public comment against a few of those members, but what concretely, how are you going to approach that so you get commission's input, staff input, and resident input? I mean, it's great that it's there,
Yep,
but just having it doesn't mean that it's going to happen.
right. Yeah, the committee and the board would have to be intentional about seeking.
I mean, are you going to
Feedback.
survey, are you going to have open forums with the public where they can ask questions?
You know, honestly, Commissioner Zalstra, the committee could do any and all of that. It could go and sit down with directors. It could talk with local agencies like Lakeshore Advantage and get additional information. It could, and it should do whatever it can to build, the best
Okay.
understanding. And
Yeah, like I said,
Yeah.
I think this is valuable.
Y-
I just think that, saying and doing are obviously not always the same thing. So I just want to make sure that we're doing as well
True.
as saying.
True. Yeah. Another thing is I'd really encourage all board members and committee members to talk with township officials, local units. Also elect state level elected officials, others who can build into the process and we can, gain more feedback from. Yeah. Yep. Commissioner Bonema, yeah.
Yeah, just, we haven't talked about this yet. A little bit earlier in this motion, we talk about interim county administrator role will be a 0.6 FTE position. That's a part-time position, paid $3,840 per pay period with 80 hours of paid leave.
Mhm.
I'd like to have some discussion around the 80 hours of paid leave.
Yeah.
This is a part-time position. He's unfortunately already on vacation and during budget right now, which is a little disappointing to me as this is when we need our administrator to answer questions. So I would like to have some discussion and potentially, in order for me to support this motion, look to strike the 80 hours. And it is a part-time position.
I guess I could try to expand on that a little bit from what I know. We're going into Thanksgiving and Christmas. This position, is going to need a certain amount of leave for those days. Holiday days, vacation days would come out of the leave. So we're going into that time period and I personally don't have a problem with the request. I think, I think we're going into kind of a little bit of a lull, which is why this can work well.
There's only one Board of Commissioners meeting in the month of December, correct?
Usually there's only one and it's the first one and the second one is canceled due to Christmas, right?
Right.
So there's already, holiday days built in. So all this is asking for essentially is, it's not 80 hours of leave, it's 80 hours of paid leave.
Yeah, I think it's a irresponsible use of the public's money. It's a part-time position.
Can I clarify
Okay.
a question, I
Sure.
guess? Interim Administrator Anderson is not here right now, obviously. Is he being paid while he's not here? I mean, has he had access to PTO? Or is this his first access to PTO? I mean,
I'd
has
have to
have
double
we already
check with
given him
HR.
80 and now we're giving him another 80?
No.
That, we don't have an answer to that.
I believe right this second, he's on a trip that was planned, I think.
No, I know he's on a trip that was planned. Are we
Hold on,
paying-
Commissioner Zalstra. Trying to answer your question.
No, no worries.
I believe the answer is no. I don't think
He's
we are.
unbenefited.
I don't think we are paying him right now.
Okay, but
I believe
I
he
guess we
is
have
on,
clarification. I don't think is, yes. I mean, what?
to my knowledge, he is on unpaid
Okay.
leave and he had a trip that was planned, I think, a year in advance or something.
Totally get that. Totally get that.
So I'm trying to answer your question.
Yeah, no, totally get that.
Right,
He's had the trip planned for a long time and not disputing his ability to take time off.
Okay,
What
yeah.
Commissioner Bonham was saying, for me also, you know, I don't necessarily have a problem with 80 hours of paid leave. You started in what, April? That's fine, but like 160 for 9 hours or 9 months of work seems excessive. So I guess I would like clarification. Have we given him PTO or not given him PTO?
I would have to ask HR or
Okay.
something, but I will say, you know,
Unbenefited.
one of the
His position's
things,
unbenefited.
I've heard the opposite, but we have not got clarification, so we're just kind of.
one of the responsibilities of our interim administrator or permanent administrator is essentially to be always available. So even if, you know, interim administrator Anderson has a day of leave, let's say over the Thanksgiving holiday or something, he's still going to be available. So it is a nice benefit for someone who has taken a significantly reduced pay as the interim administrator in this time period where he is going to continue county operations, you know, running smoothly. And I would remind you that, I don't know the exact percentage, I think he requested a 40 to 45% pay reduction to be the interim administrator
Reduction from what?
from the pay of a county
But
administrator.
again, we don't even know how much he's being paid. That we don't have, we never had a contract in front of us. So a lot of these questions that Jacob and I have are just because.
You could have emailed interim administrator Anderson and said, "Hey, John, how much are you being paid?" And he would tell you. He would tell you something like, well, the position typically pays $225,000 a year and $40,000
Not how much
in
interim
benefits.
administrators make. When we appoint John
Commissioner
Shea as-
Zylstra, please hold for just one second. He would tell you something like, when we hired John Shea, when the board hired John Shea or John Gibbs, and the pay was somewhere north of $200,000 plus benefits, plus a car allowance, plus whatever health insurance they get, it was $225,000, $250,000 a year. And he requested, I think, to work for $150,000.
Okay. But we
So I'm
don't
just
know
trying
those
to-
numbers, and that's half the problem, is that we never had a contract with John Anderson. We had a contract with John Shea when he was interim, and it was 170.
John Anderson had requested that he not have a long-term contract and that he be an at-will employee
Okay.
for the board. And he asked to be paid significantly less
But
than
again,
the
significantly
permanent.
is not a number. And so you're asking- you're
150,000
asking us to
versus
approve you're asking us to approve this.
Commissioner Zylstra. I'm trying to explain this to you with real numbers.
Okay.
He asked to be paid approximately 150,000 with no benefits.
Okay.
Instead of being paid a total benefit package of $250,000.
But that's not what
Right?
interim administrators make.
Excuse me?
That's what administrators make.
Right. So he requested a significantly reduced number, right? And he didn't have to do that. We could have paid an interim administrator the same amount as any other administrator that was budgeted. Do you think we should reduce his pay just because he has the word interim in front of his title?
John Shea was paid $158,572 as interim. I understand there's inflation. I understand that 158 is not a current number, but we don't have a number for John Anderson.
Was it a
Commissioner
benefit- was it-
Rhodey.
was it a benefited position, though. Our benefits run anywhere from 38 to 50% of.
It
total.
was. Commissioner Zylstra is just trying to cause some level of chaos.
I'm trying to get
or
information.
something, Right. Commissioner Zylstra, you could give us very detailed dollar figures anytime in the last 18 months or whatever.
I have asked for a contract. We never got a contract. We do have a contract. We did have a contract with John Shea. It's right here. We approved this contract. We never approved a contract for John Anderson.
When was that
Which would have
contract approved?
answered all the questions because the contract would have that information.
I have good news for you. The exact details are in this resolution and you can vote yes or no on them.
Yes, they start going forward. But what Jacob is saying, Commissioner Obama is saying is we don't know how much PTO he's had, if any.
None.
We don't know that.
Okay,
Do
well,
you know that for
Commissioner,
sure?
If he's
Commissioner
unbenefited,
Rhodey,
Probably none.
Well, you're saying
Commissioner-
probably. You don't know for sure either.
Commissioner Rhodey, if we could point their microphones down just a little bit. Commissioner Rhodey, let's go to you. I think we have exhausted this line of discussion.
Yeah, so hopefully I'm not adding to it again, but I think it is notable that in that same section, there's no mention of benefits, and that's because he is not receiving any benefits.
PTO is a benefit.
But he's not benefited.
There's no health there's no health insurance. He does not have the normal.
That is not our concern. Our concern is
Okay.
PTO.
Well,
The benefit.
right, so what we do have in front of us is a very detailed request for a yet reduced amount from what it has been. And I really appreciate that Interim Administrator Anderson has kept that in mind and indicated he does not want to be paid as a permanent administrator. Right, I appreciate that. Yeah,
He is not being brought on.
do you
as
think
permanent.
perhaps?
That's why he's not eligible.
Maybe we should motion for a pay study before we pass this.
No, all
You
I'm
know, take
asking for is
3
an initial
months to-
contract with John Anderson. That would have been nice.
Commissioner Cosby.
Interim positions, I agree, are not typically paid the same way, but they're compensated for benefits that they have to carry on their own. So
Right.
he didn't get paid benefits and now he's getting paid for benefits.
Okay, so
So it's just
is that
different.
clarity that
Well,
he
not
did not receive PTO? That's all we're asking. We're asking a simple question. Has he received PTO?
Commissioner
prior-
Zylstra.
That is a-
Unbenefited position, no, but I don't know that for a fact.
I-
I don't hold his time card.
I will follow up and I will ask.
Okay. If he has
Or
not
you
received
can.
PTO, then I think I'm perfectly fine with this. The cash is great. The 0.6, I understand we passed the budget. We don't need, Ben is, sitting right here, right? So we don't need all that. We're just concerned about 160 hours of paid leave for 9 months of work. That's all our concern is.
Okay, okay,
question.
thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, I can confirm that Interim Administrator Anderson is on unpaid time off during the time that he's away.
That's all I'm looking for. Appreciate that.
So Commissioner Miedema, let's move
So
on.
the 80 hours that we seem to be talking about, has John ever indicated whether some of them are going to be used specifically for the Thanksgiving holiday and the Christmas holiday? Because that would take up about 1 week's worth already, which would give him about 1 extra week of PTO, which he did not have leading up till this point. Is that correct?
He has not indicated if it will be used for Thanksgiving or Christmas, but we are going into the Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday. So I will take a leap of faith and say, I'm pretty sure he's going to use some PTO for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Commissioner Zylstra.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I will be voting no, not because of the John Anderson. I appreciate John's work. I've told him that.
Mhm.
I appreciate his work, staying on till the end of the year. Having clarified that with Ben, I'm perfectly fine with that, but I will be voting no on the other part. So
The part that was below.
the second part, the transition committee.
Okay.
Can we vote on
I'll take it.
E? Can we vote on E now?
Absolutely.
Chairman?
The motion is to approve a resolution to create an executive transition committee for the position of county administrator. Yes, we can we can vote on that. Yeah, so let's go, unless there's anything else, we'll go to the clerk. Okay,
Mrs. Wenzel,
Yes.
Mr. Zylstra,
No.
Mr. Belknap,
Yes.
Rhodey,
Yes.
Mrs. Medema,
Yes.
Mr. Kleinens,
No.
Mr. Bergman,
No.
Mr. Bonema,
No.
Ms. Cosby,
Yes.
and Mr. Moss.
yes.
And the motion passes.
Okay, moving on to number 9. We have no committee reports, so we're going to go straight to number 10, public comment. Is there anyone in person who would like to make a public comment? Just a reminder, you'll have 3 minutes, and please state your name and jurisdiction as you start.
Adria Hill, Holland Township. So in regards to this last discussion that you just had about contracts and paying out for services, let me remind you that Community Spoke has not been paid for their services because the Finance Committee is concerned that there is no contract. However, it sounds like we've been paying our county administrator for the last 6 months an untold number of dollars of tax money without a contract. This sounds very two-sided, like there's very big differences. And Joe, you can shake your head as much as you want and laugh at me, but this is the perception of somebody who's been watching all of these meetings to understand what is happening. And I'm watching these meetings and I can't understand what's happening. That leads me to think that there's either a lack of transparency or there's a lot of things happening that isn't being discussed here. And even some of your own commissioners don't seem to be aware of what's happening. Now, without self-awareness, we cannot improve. So Commissioner Moss, I'd like to make you aware of a few tendencies you have. You have a tendency to speak over many of your fellow commissioners and get upset when they speak over you. Multiple times during tonight's discussions, commissioners asked for clarification about what Commissioner Rhodey and Medema said. My apologies. Instead of letting Rhodey and Medema respond for themselves, you talk for them. You literally said what I think Rhodey was saying instead of letting Commissioner Rhodey speak for herself. Going forward, I encourage you to let each commissioner speak for themselves. They are capable.
If I could address one item there, it would, yeah, it is tonight. It would be that essentially all employees of Ottawa County are non-contracted, just so you know, and that's typical in an organization. They are at-will employees. Would anyone else like to address the board?
Sheila Detloff, Holland Township. John Shea had a contract. Let's see here. You said, Mr. Moss, I don't think John Anderson is getting paid for his time off, or to my knowledge, he's not. I don't think, to my knowledge. You also couldn't answer what he was getting paid or whether he was getting benefits, but I already FOIA'd that a few days ago, so I'll let you know when I find out. I'm sure that'll be helpful for you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Medema, going to the COVID relief fund discussion. Commissioner Medema said that it's more responsible to turn down something like that to save taxpayer money. Where do you think it goes when it gets turned down? Do you think it goes back to the taxpayers? No, it doesn't go back to the taxpayers. It goes to somebody else. Mr. Bonema pointed out that this whole discussion was taking place in the 11th hour. You had a public hearing on the budget, and you didn't give us an option to weigh in on this change because we didn't know about it. It was your responsibility to do that, and you failed us. I'm sure Jim Barry, who is sitting right back here, was probably pleased to hear that Gretchen Cosby, who is a nurse, by the way, voted down a grant for healthcare associated infection education and response. This seems like it would make a great ad. Mr. Moss, you stated that the real reason for turning it down when you said, I want the government to stop funding COVID. This is helpful to me because
Halloween's coming up and I wasn't sure what to dress up as this year. So I think I'm going to dress up as a COVID relief fund because apparently that's the most scary thing I can dress up as. You might think that you need that Glock that's strapped to your hip to defend against a 63-year-old woman who calls you incompetent and absurd in a public meeting in a public building, but it's not going to help you when COVID relief funds show up on your agenda. They're pretty scary.
Would anyone else like to address the board? Welcome.
My name's Dave Barnowski. I voted for Sheldon Township. Joe, you're on virtually every subcommittee. Why is it you always wait till the board meetings to bring up something at the last minute? You had every opportunity to bring up these questions before and you wait till to the last minute to bring something up. You all think you're protecting us from the health department. We need protection from you. The people in the health department study infectious disease. They know what to protect us from. They're not making up excuses to come and try to take away your liberty at school. I know you think that's what happened to you. You're the problem. We're going to take you out.
Be careful, sir.
Is that a threat?
I feel threatened.
It is a threat. We know how to deal with it. It sounds like a threat, sir.
I had 3 police reports filed from my home.
And if I could add, it would have been great if it came up earlier, but it came up last week at a public meeting. Yeah. Would anyone else like to address the board or perhaps threaten the board? Everyone is welcome. All comments.
Rebecca Patrick, Allendale Township. So like one of the previous commenters, I too am trying to seek understanding. And so I'd like to check my impressions based on some things I heard during the budget discussion. And specifically the discussion around returning the grant funds to the state. So first I heard that you were going to return grant funds to the state that were designed to be used in a public health emergency, which we don't know if or when or what that would look like. But yet the health department then was directed to tell you what they might need for this emergency that they don't know when or if or what it would be, instead of getting these COVID, quote, COVID relief funds. The second thing I heard was that you're not against the activities in the grant, but you voted against accepting the grant. Another thing I heard was similar to something another commenter just said, which is this item has been in the budget since the very beginning of the budget discussions this year at the beginning of August. But yet it wasn't until this evening when there was no one here to discuss the details of it that it became a subject of board conversation. And then the other thing that I heard was that the fact that the grant could be used for COVID forms the basis, or seemed to form the basis of your objection to it, although the grant can be used and is specific to be used for any communicable disease emergency that the public health department could find itself dealing with. And I also heard that you are worried about accepting funds, $900,000 worth of emergency funds, for something that you might not need and might not ever use. But surely you must know, after 2 years of grant experience, that you will not get those funds unless or until you need them. Surely you must know that. So none of this makes sense on the surface of it. Not one of those things makes sense. So what does it mean? I believe that you all are intelligent people, so it can't mean that you don't understand. But I think what it does mean is that you still have a bad faith, shall we call it, relationship with the health department. That became very clear this evening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board?
Chantal Martineau, Park Township. Just to add to what Becky was saying a minute ago about this grant for infectious diseases. Chair Moss said several times that he doesn't expect an emergency. Webster says the definition of an emergency is an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. The whole point of an emergency is that you don't expect it. It occurs without your prior knowledge. Emergency preparedness is something that is important to everyone in Ottawa County, and that is part of your job to keep us protected from emergencies that may happen, such as Mpox, which the World Health Organization recently declared a public health emergency of general concern, or avian flu, which has already appeared in dairy herds in Ottawa County. Either of these things could start spreading in Ottawa County without any prior knowledge, and the health department will be called on to respond to these emergencies. Your proposed solution was that if there was such an emergency, they would have to wait until the next board meeting, come before you and ask if they could respond to the emergency, whereupon you would take a vote and decide whether or not we would be protected from these diseases. This doesn't really seem like an appropriate way to respond to emergencies to me. I imagine that you have in your house a smoke detector in case you have a fire, which you probably are not expecting to happen. Or maybe you're just waiting to see if flames and smoke appear, and then you'll leave the house at that time. I think you owe us a little more respect and a little more concern for our general health.
Thank you. And if it helps, I would like to add that we have a health department that is well-funded and ready to handle any emergency and take immediate action without coming to the board. They are able to do that. That's why they exist.
We have a Department of Emergency Preparedness as well.
Yes, we do. I hope that's helpful. Is there anyone else in person who would like to make a public comment? Are there any online? Is there anyone else in person who would like to make a public comment? Welcome.
Good evening, Donna Mooney, Georgetown Township. Money, money, money. Boy, we just love to spend money. As evidenced by the Biden administration in the last 3.5 years, tons of money on wars, trillions of dollars, tons of inflation. So much inflation, let me just tell you. In the past 6 weeks, I've spent, I don't know, roughly $6,000 in car repairs, out-of-pocket medical. I'm 50 years old and I'm working 12 hours a day right now to keep my family from going into debt to pay for all of these emergencies and wars. And I'm sure that there will be an emergency. Our government has been working very hard on bird flu and mosquito flus and anything else that they can come up with to scare the people into submission. And, you know, I shouldn't have to work 12 hours a day at 50 years old to keep my head above water, because we have a government that is out of control spending. And I have to tell myself that I'm lucky. I'm lucky that I'm able-bodied enough and I have the means to be able to keep my head above water so that my family doesn't go into debt paying for things like, we're not privileged enough to be on government health care. And even if we were, I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want to take that money out of somebody else's pocket. Tax dollars were never meant to pay for these things. They were meant to pay for well, they were meant to pay for defense, but they were meant to pay for roads and infrastructure and things like that. Now it's whatever pipe dream comes our way. You know who I feel really bad for, though, are those who are not like me, those that the administration claims to want to help, those who can't afford to work 12 hours a day or aren't making the money to stay out of debt. That's who I feel really bad for. So listening to all this talk about, money for, I mean, we've got plenty of money based on what I've seen in our health department. I don't want to pay for any more. I'm done paying for it. I'm sick of paying for it. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment?
Hello again, Board. Christy Moplink from Zealand Township. I wanted to finish up my comments about the administrator position in the letter that was sent from former legal counsel Doug Benesson to the Ottawa Impact elected commissioners. First off, I referenced the wrong date and would like to correct that for the record. The email was from 12/22/22. The email also stated turnover is already an issue at the county. Interesting comment, since the perception that keeps being pushed is that staffing concerns are solely due to the current leadership. The threats and attitude in the email are truly shocking. I encourage the citizens to simply Google Benesson Retirement Ottawa and read it. But back to my prior comments about the behavior of the board that was in place 2 years ago, who quickly hired a health director with just days to go before leaving office when the position had been open since August of that year, and then skipped the policies in place at that time requiring the appointment to go through subcommittees. I heard the description earlier, foolish and absurd, for this type of behavior from a prior public comment tonight. Yet apparently it was acceptable in the past. It also became apparent that proper protocol was not followed with slipping the grant funds into the current budget without bringing it forward at the proper subcommittee. Thank you to those who are watching details closely and notice things such as this. Also, an interesting detail in the December 22, 2022 email from Benesson was that it was forwarded from Commissioner Bonema to Zylstra in less than 2 hours of receiving it. Yet Bonema pretended ignorance and shock after conveniently missing the first meeting in January of 2023. I would like to point out that there is a candidate in District 4 running against Bonema. He is a true conservative and a Republican, but he's on the ballot as an independent. It's been reported that Bonema is telling voters that he is the only Republican. He is the only Republican on that side of the ticket, but there is another good choice. Speaking of Zylstra, I love that tonight he's concerned about contracts, but he wasn't concerned about Community Spoke having a contract. Everything that is being treated as outrageous in current actions has truly been misconstrued in past actions when no one was looking. There's actually more oversight and transparency this time around. It will be interesting to watch and see what crazy behavior is tolerated again next year when the board composition is reset again. I'd also like to note that the comment about the denial of the grant funds still being a taxpayer liability was quite confusing, because at that point the money goes unused, especially if the deadline has passed. I look forward to learning more about these funds, since there were conflicting points made about it being for emergencies versus training, which doesn't seem to be an emergency item. I'm sure if a true major emergency that stretched over the $17 million budget or whatever number was quoted tonight that's already in place happened, I'm sure an emergency meeting could be called if such an issue ever arose again. I'm sure also that the federal government would swoop in with other options. Also, I appreciate the questions asked and answered about the treasurer comments about the delinquent tax fund revolving funds. And I also found that to see questions at the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment?
Orlando Estrada, City of Holland. I think everybody in the room can agree that they do not like to be bullied, that they want to be heard, and they don't want to be interrupted. And I don't care to poke at any commissioner. We're all guilty of it. I really hope maybe we all can forgive each other after this. I know I'm gonna be sitting fine. I think people back here are great. And I say that to say this. Imagine you want to run an honest race, and this is not anything against my current commissioner, that's not what I'm getting at, is when you find out that there's a PAC committee like Organize Ottawa, where I make a comment to ask them why they're promoting my opponent and not reaching out to me to see what my views are, because it could be almost the same actually, and then they block you. And then you find out that someone screenshots and says now they're asking for money. And then you find out that they have $80,000 in their coffers and they're still asking people to donate 25, 50 bucks. It'd be really cool if maybe they reach out to me and maybe we can, work this out. But really, I don't have to prove myself to anybody. If I feel like I need to run to express people who can't speak for themselves, not saying that my commission's not doing that, but at a different point of view, I'm going to do it no matter what. I'll probably spend $30,000 for this race if they don't want to work things out there. I'm not afraid of nobody. I've been bullied by my own party back in 2018. The then chair said not to run at all. I've been bullied by my party leadership in 2016, where he spent a PAC attack against me about spending $5,000 to $10,000. This is not my first rodeo. I simply just want to come here to also express my voice, and I'm not really here to condemn anybody. Everybody has their pros and their cons, and I'm just not having it anymore. This is getting ridiculous. Like, here's another thing too. I'm not here to jab the common good people. I think they're great or anything. They didn't reach out to me. And as far as I'm concerned, no disrespect to the commissioner in District 2, but I know his campaign finance says that he lives in District 1 when he's donating to Extreme Auto Pack, whatever. And I thought on WZZM 13, he says that he's been living in the district for 20 years. It's like, this is crazy. And then I got people saying, how come the board's not diverse? I don't even like even playing the race card. So we get rid of the only Latina that's on there, and not to say she's the voice of the Latino community, because she's clearly not. She is her own person. It's just crazy of all the contradictions that everybody says. I'm not here to jab anybody. I'm just fed up with that. I'm trying to be an individual that wants to speak for myself. But you want to know, I welcome everybody to join forces against me. It's really not a big deal. I just want to simply say some things that most people are not able to say. People that cannot endorse me, who cannot donate for me. I even ran for city council last year. And I know that Sarah Leach is watching. Maybe she wants to make a smart remark about me. I don't know. If she wants to interview me, I'm cool with that. I never met her. I would like to. I know that when she was the editor, she wouldn't print my press release when I was running for city council. Somebody cited that it was too close to the race. But yeah, they're upset that DEI got dissolved. And not to say you guys did it the right way, because I don't think you guys did it the right way, but everybody is contradicting each other left and right. And I'm just kind of like over it. So don't be surprised how aggressive I get starting tomorrow. And it's not about my commissioner. It's about proving a point about I am different than everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? Welcome.
Don Dykes from Georgetown Township. There's been a lot going on here tonight. A lot of heated arguments and good stuff is coming out. But one thing that shouldn't be done is someone threatening someone else. That person should be walked out. So we ought to remember that when we're talking. It's good to have great conversations and heated discussions, but don't threaten.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board? Is there anyone online who would like to address the board? No? Okay. Take last call in person. And if there is no additional public comment, we will move on. Thank you for those who gave public comment. I do not have anything additional for the chairman's update that has not already been said tonight. And since ending the meeting is at the call of the chair, we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.